Chapter 305, Exam Arrangements. The next morning, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, and Ginny gathered in stunned silence before the timetable posted on the door of the Great Hall notice board. The first column read, Friday 9 a.m., History of Magic, 10:30 a.m., Arithmancy. Lunch, 1 p.m., Muggle Studies, 3 p.m., Herbology. Ron's jaw dropped. What in Merlin's name? We aren't even taking Arithmancy or Muggle Studies. He shot Harry an incredulous look. So does that mean Defense Against the Dark Arts and Divination are tomorrow, Saturday, or next Monday? He began pacing, panic flitting across his face. If they're on Saturday, fine, I'll just cancel my plans. But Monday? That gives me exactly 0 fun time this weekend. Harry leaned nonchalantly against the wall, feigning indifference. After all, he wasn't sitting either of those exams. Still, he couldn't help hoping the remaining 2 papers would be scheduled for Saturday. If they fell on Monday, Draco Malfoy, who was determined to celebrate his birthday on Sunday, would be stuck cramming all day. Hermione peered over Harry's shoulder, adjusting her robes. Arithmancy and Muggle Studies must be for those who opted in. Our Defense Against the Dark Arts and Divination exams will have a separate schedule. Neville frowned, scanning the notice for tiny footnotes. I reckon they'll go on Monday, he said at last, tapping a finger against the parchment. There's barely room in tomorrow's timetable. Ron let out a groan that echoed through the corridor. Ginny shot him a sympathetic smile, but didn't try to stifle her own excitement. At least her exams were nearly behind her. Harry crossed his arms. Well, then Draco's birthday feast will have to wait, he murmured. In his mind, though, he was already bracing for a tense Sunday of last-minute revisions, for both himself and his Slytherin rival. With a collective sigh, the group dispersed, each lost in their own thoughts about magical histories, enchanted equations, and what the weekend would or wouldn't hold for them. Think of them as the OWLs and NEUTs that 5th and 7th year students sit, Sarah began. These exams run Monday through Friday for 2 weeks, with just 1 subject tested each day. Mornings are for theory, afternoons for practicals, except astronomy, whose practical is held at midnight. Every exam officially starts at 9:30 in the auditorium. They push aside the 7 long house tables and set up rows of small individual desks, all facing the examiner's table at the far end. And the invigilators? They're our own professors. Michael frowned. That doesn't add up. At lunch today, the auditorium looked completely normal. And you're telling me professors don't supervise the afternoon sessions? I've been here for years and have never seen exams in the main hall. Sarah smiled. They restore the hall to its usual setup during the lunch break. Theory exams finish much faster than practicals, so they're done by the time our normal afternoon classes would end. That gives them just enough time to reset the room before the next session. That afternoon, the practical exams were held in a small chamber just off the main hall. An intricate anti-magic enchantment had been laid over the room, imperceptible to anyone except the candidates and the examiners. This year's invigilators were the venerable wizards and witches of the Wizard Examination Bureau, some of whom had overseen Dumbledore's own trials decades ago. Neville shivered at the memory. Harry's eyes widened. That explains why the hall was sealed so tight this morning. I had to detour through the corridors and climb out of a second-floor window to get to Charms. I just assumed the 5th years were sitting their exam. They were, Neville confirmed. But what about the 7th years taking NEWTs? It's hardly a large group. They shouldn't need such heavy security. Neville shrugged. I don't know. It's the same protocol as the OWLs. Every sheet of parchment, every quill, even each desk is warded against cheating. Airing quills, memory spheres, detachable sleeve clips, none of it's allowed inside, not to mention self-correcting ink or mnemonic charms. They make sure there's no chance of dishonest magic in that room. Only the very best students at Hogwarts qualify to sit the NEDUT exams, and with prestige comes paranoia. The ordinary anti-cheating measures used during OWL exams would be useless here. That's why the exam's exact location remains a closely guarded secret, revealed only at the last possible moment. Nor do the invigilators trust anyone less than the most seasoned officials. Before dawn, a small battalion of wizened witches and wizards from the Wizard Examination Bureau arrived at the castle, their robes and staves announcing their grim purpose. At precisely 9 o'clock, every third-year student, save for Harry Potter, filed into the History of Magic classroom. Ryan Malfoy slumped into a seat near the back. Ever since he'd mastered the moon's apparition, his inexplicable revulsion for this subject had faded, but not his conviction that History of Magic was the single dullest course in the entire curriculum. Today's exam would ask them to describe, in excruciating detail, the medieval witch hunts that swept across Europe. Dusty dates, dire anecdotes, and religious inquisitions loomed on every page of his memory. And as if facing centuries of persecution weren't enough, the afternoon held another gauntlet, an arithmancy exam. Ryan sighed, uncapped his quill, and braced himself. Between recounting blood-stained trials and deciphering arcane patterns in numbers, it was going to be the longest day of third year yet. Arithmancy is a branch of divination that uses numbers to reveal a person's character, destiny, or even to predict future events. You may know it better as numerology. Modern arithmancy rests on two ancient pillars: Pythagorean philosophy, which teaches that the cosmos is governed by numbers, and the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah. In antiquity, each letter of the Latin alphabet was assigned a numerical value, and practitioners reduced those values to a single digit from 1 through 9 to perform their readings. Today's system simply maps A to 1, B to 2, and so on up to I as 9, then loops back so that J and S both equal 1, K and T equal 2, and so forth. At first, Ryan thought it utterly preposterous. In a world where most magic draws upon emotional energy, relying on pure mathematics to divine fate felt cold and mechanical. Yet the more he pondered, the more he realized that arithmancy wasn't mere superstition, it was simply another means of opening the third eye. After all, methods like tea-leaf reading, bird augury, 7-character astrology, crystal ball scrying, magic stone divination, and dream interpretation all pursue the same goal: glimpsing truths hidden just beyond the veil. Ryan had always believed that a witch or wizard born with a third eye needn't master every divination method under the sun. Just find the one that truly resonates, learn it inside and out, and merely skim the basics of the others. Take Professor Trelawney, for example. If anyone would flourish at card or tea leaf reading, it was her, yet she spent her days peering into a crystal ball that gave her nothing but headaches. So logically, Ryan thought, he shouldn't sign up for divination at all. If anything, arithmancy would suit him far better than Trelawney's vague prophecies. And yet, when the course lists opened, he did the unthinkable. He enrolled not only in divination, but in 12 classes across every subject imaginable. How had he managed it? Well, at the very moment Hogwarts authorities deemed time turners too dangerous for student use, Ryan quietly slipped under the radar, carving out the extra slots in his schedule before anyone noticed. Without that sleight of hand, he'd never have swung so many courses. The real impetus, though, came from Kate and Penelope, friends who'd also taken 12 classes the year before. When it was Ryan's turn to pick, they refused to let him slack. They reminded him of the rainy afternoon when the three of them had huddled under a single, dripping umbrella. Now, they joked, they were going to rip that umbrella right out from under him, and they wouldn't rest until he'd matched their record. Finally, they convinced Ryan to write another piece for the Quibbler, exposing the ridiculous scheduling maze Hogwarts had devised. If the wizarding world was going to endure endless divination seminars and arithmancy exams, then by all means it should know exactly how chaotic the system had become. So here he was, notebooks bulging, parchments piled high, stepping into the divination tower with exactly zero confidence in what awaited him. But he would endure it, for Kate and Penelope, for his beloved arithmancy, and, of course, for the next explosive headline in the Quibbler. Since the time converter device was strictly off-limits, they came up with a simpler workaround, a basic spell that conjures a temporary duplicate body, usable only for studying. That way, every underclassman could experience the thrill and the headache of juggling 12 courses at once. As soon as the plan was floated, Ryan flatly refused to have anything to do with it. True to form, Penelope and Kate pounced on his refusal and appointed themselves his personal attendance monitors for every elective. The upshot? Ryan still has to attend all 12 classes in person, Watching his roommate Harry pacing the common room in frustration, stuck without exams to sit for, Ryan's heart went out to him. He couldn't stand seeing Harry so bored and helpless. After all, what good is a best friend and a roommate if you can't lend a hand when things go south? Determined to help, Ryan began crafting a surprise that would get Harry back into the lecture halls and toward those elusive exam seats. He hoped this little magical stunt would not only lift Harry's spirits, but also give him a fair shot at catching up and passing alongside everyone else. Chapter 778, Eileen Prince Snape. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Instead of returning to Spinner's End as they normally would to care for the children, Severus Snape and Lily Evans were holed up in the potions classroom at Hogwarts, grading potions theory exams for 1st through 7th year students. They felt no urgency. Severus had a safeguard in place. The special transformation potion that had granted him a female form for the birth had just worn off, restoring him to his customary self. Cradling his newborn, he prepared to set off for number 4, Privet Drive. Lily's friendship with her sister Petunia ran far deeper than the rest of the family realized. News reached Privet Drive that evening, Dudley having discovered that his supposedly deceased aunt had been unconscious at Professor Snape's home and only recently awakened, had sent an urgent letter to his mother the moment he heard. Though Petunia felt a pang of guilt for having neglected Harry, she could not resist writing back to Lily. That very night, Lily arrived at 4 Privet Drive, and this time she concealed nothing. She no longer hesitated to tell Petunia the full story of her child. In fact, she'd been desperate to share the truth. Before long, she planned to make a formal announcement. She would not allow her son to grow up in secret or in shame. It had been Petunia's story from the start. The baby was hers, and Severus Snape was the father. Today was the first time he'd formally presented the child at the Dursleys' home. Juggling 2 lives, one with the Dursleys and one with Lily and his daughter, wasn't especially taxing for him. His memory charms were too finely honed for even Voldemort to penetrate. He'd spent the morning in the nursery, gently guiding little Emma's chubby hand as she babbled. Beside him, Lily hovered over a stack of first-year exam papers. The jagged, mistake-ridden scripts used to give him migraines. His blood pressure would spike at every botched spelling charm and misfired potion formula, but today marking them felt oddly relaxing, even pleasant. For the first time in ages, he smiled without reserve. Then, as abruptly as a rogue thunderbolt, his smile vanished. A pitch-black envelope hovered in midair and settled into his palm. On its silky surface were 2 glittering silver characters, Zhou Yi. Lily, who had painstakingly mastered both the writing and pronunciation of those Mandarin words, gasped. Emma reached out with a pudgy finger, her eyes wide in wonder. Zhou Yi? Lily repeated softly in Chinese, her voice a blend of surprise and foreboding. Snape's fingertips brushed the seal. In that instant, a surge of hidden knowledge, its sender, its purpose, an entire web of secrecy, flooded back into his mind. He felt the chill of old alliances stirring, threads he'd thought long severed. He folded his gaze over Lily's shoulder, voice measured but urgent. I remember. I know Zhou Yi. He pressed his wand into his waistcoat pocket, eyes flicking to the envelope as if it might vanish. Outside the nursery, the Dursleys carried on oblivious. But within that small room, everything had just changed. I didn't recognize them at first because of the binding magic contract, Snape said quietly, glancing at Lily. She frowned. A magic contract? He nodded. Yes. It's an ancient agreement between me and that mysterious family. You remember when I told you I was commissioned to build the world's largest potion ingredient repository? Once the construction was finished, all memory of the family vanished from my mind, until now. It turns out Zhou Yi, the ghostly fairy, was my liaison to them. After you expressed a desire to visit the medicinal herb garden, I sent a letter to my only contact point. I didn't expect a reply so quickly. Snape unfolded a piece of parchment and read aloud. Dear Professor Snape, we have approved your request. This document serves as a one-time portkey. You and Miss Evans may use it to arrive at the medicinal herb garden today. The XXX family. Lily stepped forward, arms crossed. Why do they still hide their name behind XXX even in the letter? She paused, then her voice dropped. And if we go today, and you dispatch your clone to handle any trouble, What happens if the real you is incapacitated? The baby. Snape shook his head, offering a reassuring smile. Don't worry. The contract binds my entire being, mind, body, and soul. The clone creation magic was a gift from them as well. Whatever happens to a duplicate cannot sever the link to my true self. He folded the letter and slipped it into his robe. Shall we? Lily nodded, her concern easing as she took his arm. Together, they stepped forward and activated the portkey on their way to the elusive garden hidden beyond time and enchantment. Once we arrive, my clone will still obey me, and by virtue of the spell, that clone will function as my true body. Lily frowned. I still can't imagine you as yourself with that sallow complexion and greasy hair. Before we last parted, you looked exactly like this, just without the greasy locks. How did you turn yourself into such a gloomy sight? Snape's voice dropped to a hush. Because I lost you. A heavy silence settled over the room, so complete that even their breathing seemed to fade away. Lily cleared her throat. All right then, let's go. Early departure, early return. Blushing, she took the parchment from Snape and swept her wand over it. In an instant, a swirling vortex materialized around the letter, expanding until it consumed them both. The portal winked out as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only Lily's distant exclamation, This key really is unpredictable. Meanwhile, Harry was lounging in the sunshine outside the castle when he felt a sudden urge to speak with his mother. He rose, strolled to the door of Snape's office, and called out the password without hesitation. Meteor! The serpent-shaped relief slid forward, its fangs snapping onto the handle. With a soft click, the door swung open. Harry pushed open the door and paused in the threshold. The room was suffused with the soft glow of twin lanterns and a delicate scent of lilies, an atmosphere entirely at odds with the rows of glass bottles lining every shelf. Each vessel held some strange viscous potion in which fragments of plants and small creatures drifted like curiosities in amber. Harry's heart skipped. This was unmistakably his mother's workspace, not Snape's. Beside a sturdy oak desk stood a high-backed chair upholstered in pale pink velvet. On the desk lay a feather quill, its tip still damp with ink, and a neat pile of parchment, some exams already scored, others awaiting their professor's scrutiny. Yet the room was empty. He closed the door behind him with a soft click and stepped forward. Gingerly, he pressed a hand against the cushion. It was still warm, as if its owner had only just risen. Harry glanced at the hearth. The fire had long since died, the coals cold and ashen. However, they had arrived, whether by flue powder from Nocturne Alley or by some less obvious route. They weren't nearby now. According to Yu Wen, he should have met them on his descent into the dungeons. The only other possibilities were a hidden passage unmarked on the Marauder's map, or an enchanted key granting secret access to Snape's sanctum. Harry's eyes narrowed as he considered each option, the quiet room holding its secrets close. They'd barely arrived at the headmaster's office when an urgent summons from Professor Dumbledore demanded their immediate appearance elsewhere. With the anti-apparition wards in this room temporarily lifted, Harry and Professor Snape apparated to the location Dumbledore had specified. It had been only a month since Voldemort's return, and all reports pointed to suspicious activity off the North Sea coast. Naturally, Severus Snape, marked by the Dark Lord's own brand, would have to go in person. Harry was rifling through Dumbledore's scattered parchments when something on the desk caught his eye. A single pacifier, its rubber teat oddly gleaming in the lamplight. On impulse, he reached out and touched it, and felt a tug beneath his navel so strong it lifted his legs off the floor. The world exploded into a maelstrom of colors and howling wind. Try as he might, he could not let go. His finger clung to the pacifier as though it were magnetized, pulling him inexorably forward, until, with a heavy thud, Harry's feet found solid ground again. He looked up at a room transformed. Everywhere he glanced, there were baby clothes, bottles, and toys neatly arranged on shelves and tables. Lush green plants and blooming flowers filled the air with the fresh, earthy scent of a garden after rain. At the center stood an elegant four-poster bed draped in deep scarlet and gold, Gryffindor colors, and on its headboard, in graceful gilt letters, the name Lily Evans. Beside the bed sat a small, pristine crib, its mattress unrumpled, waiting for someone. I'd be happy to help, but I only have a single sentence at the moment. Could you please paste the full chapter you'd like me to revise? Once I have the complete text, I can rewrite it into polished, idiomatic English. Chapter 779, A Good Show. Harry stopped dead at the nameplate. Eileen Prince Snape. He traced the gilded letters on the cradle's edge, noting the faint, freshly cast wards still lingering in the air. The tiny cradle told him all he needed to know. This child could only have been born very recently. His momentary surprise vanished as a memory flashed through his mind. Upon entering the room, he'd felt as though an X-ray spell had swept over him, probing every inch of his being, then abruptly halted. Now he realized what had stopped it: his mother's magic. Lily's sacrificial protection still clung to a part of his soul, and her love had blindsided the mansion's detection wards, preventing any alarms or counterattacks. Harry's expression hardened. His mother had stayed here. The long strands of black hair draped across the pillow left no doubt. Had Lily not been resurrected that April, he might have assumed this newborn was hers. But the name on the plaque, Eileen Prince Snape, combined with the cradle's location, made the truth unmistakable. In that instant, everything clicked into place. Harry's heart sank as the truth dawned on him. Snape really was trying to tie his mother down with a child. He pictured his mother cooing over the baby, enchanted by every gurgle and smile, just the distraction Snape needed. Insidious, Harry breathed. First he seduces Mum with tea and sympathy, now he ropes her in with a child. On the bedside table lay a curious portkey, shaped like a pacifier. Harry swept it up and turned it over in his hand. His head told him to activate it and zip back to Hogwarts at once, warn everyone before Snape's plan went any further. But when he twisted his wrist, expecting that familiar tug, nothing happened. It was as if the portkey were wading through treacle, powerful but utterly stuck. A single-use enchantment, he realized with rising panic. It would only take him here, nowhere else. His only alternative was the Flu Network, and that meant finding a fireplace. But this guest room had none. More troubling still, his mother and Snape were nowhere to be found at the castle. They'd clearly come here together, probably off shopping with their new charge. And so the spare portkeys remained out of reach. Harry pressed his back against the wall, trying not to let his worry show. He'd have to find another way, and fast, before Snape's scheme became a fait accompli. Harry weighed his options. He could run into someone at any moment, or worse, use a Flu fireplace at Hogwarts and set off a log of professor-approved connections. If he'd come through a registered fireplace, it would show up on the headmaster's records. Better to wait here, he decided, and settled on the edge of the bed, pushing the mirror world out of his mind. Of course, he could slip through the mirror and use it as a shortcut back to Hogwarts, but not just yet. Downstairs, Snape and the children were being shown an almost shocking level of courtesy by the Dursleys. Vernon's broad, purplish face was a riot of confusion. He still couldn't grasp that Severus was a wizard, just like James Potter, and that Harry was his sister's boy. Then why had Petunia suddenly softened towards Snape and Aaron? Was it simply because Aaron was a girl? He got his answer moments later from his wife. Petunia brushed a tear from her cheek. "We haven't seen each other in 20 years, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "But being here with Lily again, it feels so right. Honestly, you're the only oddball I'd ever accept by Lily's side. After all you've done, especially saving her, you deserve it." Vernon stared at her speechless, the last of his bewilderment melting into reluctant acceptance. "Professor Snape often looks out for me at school," Dudley said casually. Only then did Vernon Dursley sit up straight. So this gloomy, forbidding man was the potions master his son had been praising, the very same Severus Snape who had rescued Petunia's sister Penny. Vernon recalled Petunia and Dudley mentioning Snape before, but he'd never cared to learn the peculiar names of wizards. He hadn't even remembered Harry's name until a fortnight after bringing him home. A realization suddenly struck him. This was why Petunia had welcomed Snape and his children into their home, because Snape had shown kindness to Dudley. Vernon's heart skipped a beat. "So he's good to Dudley?" he muttered, but his smile froze the moment the thought completed itself. They hadn't crossed paths in over 20 years. From what he'd overheard, Penny and Snape had been childhood sweethearts. No wonder Petunia had held such a grudge against her own sister. She must have believed Penny stole her boyfriend. And all this time, Snape's generosity toward Dudley, and as Dudley had mentioned, even greater attention paid to Harry, sprang from that old bond. Just like the stories Petunia had told about Penny's devotion to her friend Aaron, and her lingering feelings for Snape, everything snapped into place. A whirlwind of revelation swirled through Vernon Dursley's mind as he stared at the dark-haired professor with new and unsettling understanding. Severus Snape's nostrils flared as his breathing quickened. Before he could demand an explanation, Vernon Dursley hurried between him and the front door. "Sorry, Professor Snape," Vernon wheezed, waving a dismissive hand. "I just remembered we're expecting some very important business guests tonight. Mr. Snape." "My name is Snape," the wizard corrected, his dark eyes narrowing. "All right, Mr. Snape," Vernon continued, ignoring the correction. "This particular client has a temper, absolutely loathes children. He's childless, you see. Even I, your oldest friend, only dare invite him over when our boy is at school." Snape's gaze flicked to Vernon's wife, Petunia, Penny Dursley, whose eager smile made him uneasy. He was certain Vernon was lying about the guest's disposition. Something about Vernon's twitching lip and stiff shoulders told him as much. But as he watched Penny beam at him, another thought struck him like a curse. Was Vernon jealous? Was he afraid Penny preferred Snape's company? Snape, having never married, nonetheless knew that husbands often understood their wives' hearts, and Penny's warmth toward him had been unmistakable. Feeling suddenly protective, Snape swept forward and scooped up the small boy in front of him, Harry, the Dursleys' nephew. Harry looked up at Snape with wide, startled eyes, but Snape ignored him, setting his jaw in a rare display of concern. Vernon spluttered, "Hey, put him down!" Petunia hurried to Snape's side, placing a hand on his arm. "Severus, don't go yet," she pleaded softly. Snape released Harry at once, but his expression remained tense. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I have duties of my own. It's exam day for my students at Hogwarts." With that, he turned on his heel and walked briskly out the door, leaving the Dursleys blinking after him in stunned silence. "I still have piles of papers to grade. I'm leaving now. I won't trouble you. Lily and I will visit next time." With that, Severus Snape scooped the infant from Lily's arms and strode from the room, closing the door with a decisive click. Inside, Vernon and Petunia Dursley exchanged relieved glances and wiped their sweating brows, until Petunia's shrill voice rang out behind the barrier. "How dare you lie to me? Eliminate my brother-in-law at once. Hurry, stop Severus!" Snape disappeared in a swirl of dark robes. Elsewhere, Harry lay asleep beneath a four-poster bed redolent of his mother's perfume. The tiny Phoenix Patronus perched over his heart had already closed its amber eyes, lulled by the residue of Lily's protective magic. Under that gentle influence, Harry's breathing was deep and even. He didn't stir as Severus slipped silently into the room. Upstairs, Snape laid the baby in his crib with practiced care. Then something on the bed caught his eye, a familiar small lump beneath the crisp sheets. He leaned closer, heart pounding. That unruly shock of black hair. It was Harry Potter. Chapter 780. "Harry, I have a younger sister." Severus Snape stood by the crib, eyes locked on Harry Potter. The mere existence of baby Eileen had transformed the entire atmosphere in the nursery. Snape's glare alone could have frozen a room solid. Yet Harry, curled up in bed nearby, seemed utterly unbothered. He shifted positions with youthful ease, prompting the low, simmering tension around Snape to ratchet even higher. Even little Eileen, who usually fussed and woke at the slightest noise, lay perfectly still, her eyes quietly closed. She dared not stir, afraid perhaps that her furious godfather would notice she'd woken. Slowly, minutes ticked by, the late afternoon light fading toward dusk, but Snape remained motionless, his expression as sharp as ever. He'd placed a gentle, protective charm on Eileen to guarantee her a sound sleep, and now he had all the time in the world to keep glaring at Harry. He wondered with a grudging curiosity how long the boy would snooze. If it weren't for Lily by his side, wand occasionally flicking through countless brewing ingredients, Snape would have snatched his own wand from its holster and given Potter a revival charm just to start an argument. Time dragged on, stretching painfully. Snape's hand twitched toward his robe, then hesitated. He felt as though he'd been standing there for a century. At last, his arm inched forward again, ready to draw his wand, and then a soft yawn escaped him. With a sigh, Snape let his hand drop. Perhaps he would have to wait a little longer. Harry woke with a start. "Professor Snape!" he shouted, tumbling out of bed in his fright. But it wasn't just the sudden appearance of Snape that unnerved him. It was the fact that the face looming over him looked exactly as he remembered. Pale, greasy hair plastered across a sallow brow. Harry's mind raced. Had Snape been hiding behind some kind of flawless makeup, a beauty potion, or perhaps those rippling muscles Harry thought he'd seen before were no more than an illusion, a temporary transfiguration charm like the ones his father used? How cunning, how utterly deceitful. Snape must have hoodwinked his mother with that perfect disguise. Yet Harry betrayed none of his suspicions as he scrambled to his feet. "How long have you been standing there?" he demanded. Snape merely snorted, his gaze flickering toward the closed door as though expecting someone else to arrive. Harry's heart thudded. His mother? How dare she? And she's already dropped the disguise. He turned, and his breath caught. In the crib lay a sleeping baby girl, her delicate features unnervingly familiar. That child's face was almost identical to his mother's. Shock pinned him to the spot. He stood in the dim corridor, taking in the familiar figure before him. Black hair, just like his father's, like Severus Snape's, and those unmistakable green eyes. If you didn't know them by blood, their resemblance would seem impossible. Snape caught Harry's stare, but remained silent. Only the faintest twitch at the corner of his thin lips betrayed his awareness. Then, with a soft click, the door behind them swung open. Lily slipped into the room, that closing her eyes briefly as she laid a hand possessively on Severus's arm. "Severus, what surprise have you been hinting at?" she asked, her voice warm and teasing. "Mother." Severus's tone was cool. Lily's eyes shot open. She spotted Harry at once. "Harry," she cried. "What on earth are you doing here?" She shot a mock glare at Severus. "Harry's in my room, and you didn't think to warn me?" Severus's pale face curled into a half-smile. "I intended to, but Mr. Potter is rather private. I slipped into your bedchamber as soon as I arrived. He didn't stir until 3 minutes ago." Both Severuses snorted simultaneously at the remark. Then the greasy-haired, sallow-faced Severus gave a slight bow and silently retreated down the hallway. Lily turned back to Harry, concern knitting her brow. "All right, then. How did you get in here? Did you need something? Gillweed?" She tested the name lightly, as if it meant thing. "I'd unlock his secret." Harry shrugged. "I was bored and wanted to talk to you, Mum. I must have accidentally tapped the door's unlocking charm." Lily's eyes widened in alarm. "That can't be. Our surveillance wards would have recorded any fluctuation in magical energy." She reached out, as if to examine the door herself, her voice a mixture of wonder and worry. Lily had been certain Harry would slip past the house's protective wards without trouble. After all, Severus Snape had arrived here before Petunia could, and Harry, now fused with the resurrection stone, his power bordering on the divine, would surely find such defenses trivial. Yet as they pressed against the barrier, its silent shimmer remained flawless, exactly as strong as the day they left. She had misjudged the magic entirely. Harry stood just inside the threshold, brow furrowed. "Maybe it's because I still carry your ancient love magic, Mother," he offered, voice low. Lily stared at him. "You think you followed that magic here, found the door key, and then, utterly heartbroken, just collapsed into sleep?" she asked, unable to hide her disbelief. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's possible, but either way, we're in a bind. The key only opens this house from the outside, and every use of the Flu network leaves a trace. We can't risk broadcasting Hogwarts' location." Lily's shoulders tensed. "Then how do we get you back to school?" Harry's eyes brightened. "Allow me a suggestion. Potter may simply have forgotten he can still travel through the mirror world to return." From the hearth, Snape watched them with a hardened sneer. "Perhaps," he drawled. "But that still leaves us with more questions than answers." He stepped forward, folding his arms. "We'll need a better plan, and fast." Outside, the warded walls pulsed softly, indifferent to their schemes. Time was running out, and the true nature of those ancient protections remained maddeningly out of reach. Harry's heart pounded in his chest. I forgot," he stammered. "When I arrived here, I felt so sleepy, I just wanted to lie down." He realized with a jolt that something had gone wrong. Snape's duplication magic must have scrambled his memories. even wiping his knowledge of the mirror world, and every compromised thought reminded him of one person, Ryan. Severus Snape offered a thin, satisfied smile. "Sleepy, are you? It's hard to adjust to an unfamiliar bed. By all means, rest." Lily stepped forward, glancing around the sunlit room. "Severus, look at all these flowers and herbs. The air is so fresh it lulls you to sleep. And this bed?" She traced a finger over the polished wood of the four-poster. "It's mine, not some stranger's. It even resembles the Hogwarts dormitory beds Harry knows so well. He should feel quite at home." Lily didn't entirely believe Harry's excuse, but he was her son. What harm could come of letting him rest? Perhaps he simply wanted the comfort of his mother's bed. Harry shifted nervously in his chair, staring at the child playing quietly on the carpet. His voice came out in a hushed rush. "What happened to her? She can't be related to you by blood, can she?" He seized on the question to change the subject, and to probe a suspicion he dared not voice. He had guessed long ago that the little girl was somehow connected to his mother and to Severus Snape's infamous transgender fertility potion. If Snape had indeed used some bizarre elixir to create a child shared between himself and Lily, Harry needed to know, and he couldn't risk bringing up the mirror world, or Ryan for that matter. Lily gave him a steady look and explained gently, "You know that Snape discovered and perfected that so-called fertility potion." At her words, Snape, standing just behind Harry, went stiff and flushed bright pink at the base of his ears. He said nothing, his dark eyes locked on the child. Harry felt the room spin and collapsed back onto the bed. "So, I have another sister?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," Lily confirmed, her tone calm but firm. Harry swallowed hard, and after a moment asked, "Who else knows?" "Only Petunia and the Dursleys," Lily replied quietly. "Maybe Dudley knows, too." "Special thanks to my classmates, Don't Cry Fish, Wolf King, and Reading Comprehension for your monthly tickets, and to everyone else for your recommendations and subscriptions." Chapter 39, Harry, A Twisted Love. At 7 o'clock in the evening on Spider End Alley, Lily Potter sat by the hearth, cradling her infant daughter in one arm as she fed her gently. With the other hand, she stroked the baby's back in comforting pats, coaxing away any burps before they could trouble her. Across the room, Severus Snape stood at the window, his dark eyes following the last of the daylight slipping down the narrow street. "You sent Harry back just now?" he asked quietly. He looked unsettled. Lily glanced up, amusement flickering across her face. "Oh, so no more Mr. Potter, is it?" Snape sighed, his gaze still fixed outside. "I just can't bear the idea of him wandering through your rooms anymore, least of all sleeping in that new bed I made for you." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's childish. I hate that I feel this way." Lily's smile softened into something more tender. She knew exactly what he meant. Harry's features had been haunted all day, haunted by loss, by unexpected revelations, by burdens no child should carry. And now, with a secret half-sister suddenly thrust into his life, who knew how much more he could endure? Yet beneath Snape's clipped words, she detected the fierce protectiveness he'd always reserved for her godson. "Let's not dwell on Harry," she said, rising and smoothing the folds of her dress. "We have bigger news to break. How did the run-through go? Were the tabloids where we expected them?" Snape turned away from the window, expression unreadable. "A few of them hung back along the route from Privet Drive to here. They'll have enough to piece together a scoop." Lily nodded, a victorious gleam in her eye. "Perfect. They'll report Irene's existence in tomorrow's editions. All it took was a 6 o'clock exit." Snape offered her a rare, wry smile. "Then let the performance begin." Lily settled back into her chair, rocking her daughter gently, while Snape extinguished the last embers in the hearth. Beyond their curtained windows, the lantern-lit streets of London wound on, poised to carry their carefully choreographed secret into the world. "You should be able to track them down if you retrace your steps," Lily suggested. "Wait until someone reports back. Then all we have to do is expose the child's true identity." "No," Snape cut her off, shaking his head. "I hardly set foot inside number 4 Privet Drive before they showed me the door." Lily frowned. "They didn't even give you a chance?" "But I met Petunia's daughter, Penny. She seemed to like you." "That's precisely the problem." Snape massaged his temples. "Penny made a great fuss over me, practically doting at my feet. That gave Vernon the perfect excuse to barge in, break up my conversation with Petunia, and order me off their property. Merlin's beard, I never saw that coming. Tell me exactly what happened. Lily leaned in, eager for every detail of Snape's short-lived Dursley visit. At that moment, Harry trudged into the Ravenclaw common room, his shoulders stiff and the back of his neck burning. "Harry, what on earth happened to you?" Ron asked, concern etched across his sunburned face as he rubbed at the tender skin. They'd spent the afternoon in the greenhouses, studying resistant mandrake cultivars under the blazing sun, and everyone had emerged with patches of red across their necks. Ron winced, eyeing Harry's scarlet collar line. "Well," Ron said, sounding both hopeful and anxious, "if our herbology exam isn't this Saturday, they'll push it to Monday, and at least then I can reorganize my revision schedule." He should have been buried in his defense against the dark arts and divination notes, preparing for his final exams. Instead, he'd completely forgotten every lesson, because he'd never felt so utterly lost before. Not even the night he dreamed of Voldemort's return had shaken him like this. Ron looked as if his heart might break. Ginny, Harry's girlfriend, pressed her cheek against his chest, tears welling in her reddened eyes, her brow tightly furrowed, as though she might collapse at any moment. Neville stood quietly off to the side, his transparent sword heart skill picking up on Harry's turbulent emotions, anger laced with relief, joy spiked by sorrow, and an underlying shock. All of it combined into a swirl of confusion no one quite knew how to soothe. Harry let out a long, weary sigh. The truth he'd been carrying had begun, half an hour earlier, in a cramped flat on Spinner's End Alley. Lily had looked up from a stack of parchments and almost casually said, "Harry, you don't have to hide anything about the baby. We were going to announce it ourselves. And this proves you didn't bring me back to life last April. After all, a child can't be born that quickly." The news had knocked the wind out of him. Now, surrounded by the concern and affection of his oldest friends, Harry realized there was no more hiding. He would have to tell them everything. Harry's mind was in turmoil. How exactly would this revelation come out, blazoned across the prophet? And if Sirius ever found out, he'd race straight to Hogwarts. No one could stop him. How was Harry supposed to handle the storm brewing between Sirius and his mother? He exhaled deeply, then rested a hand gently on Ginny's head. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "Professor Porter Evans and Snape, they had a child?" Ginny crossed her arms. "Isn't it obvious? Professor Porter Evans spent the night at Snape's house. It only makes sense. Harry, you don't have to take this on yourself. Your father," Ron leaned forward, resting his hand on the back of Harry's, "doesn't deserve all your misery. I'd gladly bear it for you, mate." With a sharp crack, Ginny slapped Ron's hand aside. "Keep your hands to yourself. Harry's my fiancé, not yours." Ron bristled. "What are you talking about? I care for Harry too. I've worried about him for ages." "Enough," Harry's voice rang out. Both Ginny and Ron fell silent, shrinking back under his glare. Harry took a deep breath. Once calmness returned, he told them everything that had happened in Knockturn Alley that afternoon, his narrow escape, the cryptic warnings, and the shocking news about his mother. Ginny and Ron listened in stunned silence. When he finished, Ron shook his head in disbelief. "What a genius," he muttered. "Snape never ceases to amaze me." Ginny covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Harry stared at them both. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. "Professor Snape really is something else at his craft," Ron said, shaking his head with reluctant admiration. "I'll admit I'm impressed, but who blithely brews that potion and then wins back his first love? It's almost too dramatic." He glanced up at the sky, lost in thought. Ginny's cheeks flamed red. Her hair seemed to bristle with irritation. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Can you ever let him have one moment to himself?" "Ginny, don't," Neville warned softly, placing a hand on her arm. "No need to get worked up." Harry stiffened, stepping a pace away from Ron. Unease flickered across his face. "Ron," he said quietly, "you'd do better to forget about it. That kind of obsession isn't normal." Ron blinked. "Harry, what on earth are you talking about?" He gave a short, brittle laugh. "I was talking about Lavender. Lately she's been distant, and I thought everything was fine between us." Neville raised an eyebrow. "Could it be that you're the one drifting away?" Ginny dropped close to Harry's ear and whispered, From now on, you should sleep in the dormitory, or better yet, use the room of requirement. That way, you don't have to worry about him messing with your hair. And be sure to wash the sheets afterward. No traces, no chance of any more tricks. Wear a hat, too. Just don't give Ron the opportunity to touch you. Harry's eyes widened. He nodded so vigorously his head bobbed. Whatever plan Ginny had cooked up, he knew he'd follow it to the letter. He felt no sorrow this time, only a cold, paralyzing fear. He already had a daughter, Mei Ling, born of his own blood in a dream. But for Ron's child, there would be no bond at all. That very thought made his knees buckle. "Harry, let's get back to the dorm first," Ginny whispered. "We need to fix the bed before Ron comes back." Harry reached out, steadying her. Ginny's legs trembled. She half laughed, half gasped. "Help me up." As they rose, Ron tensed. He let out a deliberate yawn, stretched his arms wide, then started toward the dormitory corridor as if nothing were amiss. "Neville!" Harry hissed. Neville, wielding the transparent heart of the sword, moved in a flash. He intercepted Ron, and with one swift motion, slipped an arm around Ron's neck, like a steel vise. "Hey, what are you doing?" Ron struggled, panic in his eyes. Neville's grip didn't loosen. "Sorry, mate. You stay right here in the common room until Harry and Ginny are safely in their dorm." Chapter 7 and 82, Shocking News and Ron's Hair-Pulling Backfire. At last, they'd reached a compromise. Harry agreed to give up his daily excursions to the room of requirement. On one condition, Ron would swap beds with Anthony. Now Harry's only extra task each morning was to make up his neatly traded bunk. With that settled, the four of them settled back into their seats. Ginny borrowed a fashion paper from Andrew, Ravenclaw's resident trendsetter, carefully studying the latest wizarding hat designs while sneaking glances at Harry. Ron pretended to pore over a copy of Magic in the Muggle world, but every few seconds his eyes darted toward Harry's perpetually unruly hair, as if he couldn't wait to grab a fistful. Neville, all seriousness and determination, flipped through his neatly organized revision notes. Harry himself simply stared off into space, as though his mind were 1,000,000 miles away. Meanwhile, in the neighboring chamber of the room of requirement, Kate sat slumped against a plush armchair, her huge round eyes and long curled lashes giving her a perpetually mournful expression. She sighed, exasperated. "That's it? You're letting him off that easily?" Her voice trembled with disbelief. "You promised you'd give him a real lesson." Ginny shot her a sideways glance. "Yeah, this isn't fair. Harry Potter's got daughters now, remember?" Kate's shoulders sagged further. "Great, he'll never hear the end of it." And with that, the castle corridors fell back into their usual buzz, everyone caught between relief that the dispute was over and unease about what would come next. Penello's parting words still echoed in his mind. Being his half-sister didn't matter. Just like the last time she insulted Ryan, she'd added with a quiet edge. Back then, Ryan had lain bedridden for an entire month. Fields would have lain fallow in any ordinary world, but thanks to his unrivaled medical magic, even that became possible. And yet, this time around, Harry Potter had been let off astonishingly easy. Ryan met Penello's gaze and instantly grasped what she meant. "You think I'm making excuses. Harry hardly crossed me, and besides," he said, "there's still business to attend to. Keeping Ron's hair from growing was torture enough." True to Lane's warning, the repercussions came swiftly. Saturday morning dawned heavy with tension throughout the dormitory. The gleaming door panels offered the clearest sign of all. Exams weren't happening today. They'd been postponed until Monday. Ron and the others exchanged disgruntled looks. As third years, they'd never endured the cliffhanger exams that fifth years faced. Their complaints began to rise, only to be cut off by an unexpected shout from the hallway. "It's Anthony!" Ron burst into the common room brandishing a Muggle newspaper. He dropped it onto the table beside Harry and nudged him excitedly. "Harry, look at this!" Harry glanced at the page. "Australian jewel beetles are nearly extinct," he read aloud. "Apparently, these bugs prefer big, shiny beer bottles over real mates, so much so that they'll keep trying to breed with a bottle until they perish of thirst or get eaten by other insects. It's a real ecological disaster. We'll have to revise countless potion recipes. After all, we harvest those jet-black beetle eyes for our draughts and elixirs." "That's not the page I meant," Ron said with a huff, flipping the paper over. "Let me see." Harry reached for it and froze. Ron, Neville, Hermione, and the rest gathered around. In the scramble, Ron leaned against Harry's armchair and accidentally brushed his hand over Harry's pillow. Unseen by all, a few strands of Harry's dark, glossy hair slipped into Ron's pocket. They stared at the page. Dominating the front was a color photograph so crisp it might have been enchanted, except it didn't move, so it had to be a Muggle snapshot. In the center stood a greasy-haired, hollow-cheeked Severus Snape. To his right was Lily, Professor Evans by reputation, though the caption implied her name was now Snape, and in her arms she cradled a tiny daughter. Still, Aunce fell. Neville's eyes went wide. Ron gaped as though he'd seen a ghost. Hermione stared as if she'd misplaced hot coals in her robes. Finally, Neville breathed. "Professor Snape." No one spoke again. Beneath the picture, the printed caption spelled out the unimaginable: Severus and Lily Snape with their baby girl. The words glowed impossibly bright across the page, heralding a future none of them had ever dared to hope for. Chapter 7. Lily Evans remarries and has children, by special correspondent Inko Lester. It seems the name on everyone's lips these days isn't Lily Potter, but Lily Snape. I discovered the startling news just last night, and it has sent shockwaves through both the wizarding world and the Muggle community. After finishing my shift at the Muggle Studies Outreach Center, I was strolling home through our quiet neighborhood when a sudden flash of light caught my eye. A small photo studio on the corner had just installed a state-of-the-art camera, the kind of novelty that always piques my curiosity. Anyone who's taken my classes with Professor Caradoc Bubaji knows I can't resist new Muggle gadgets. Peering in through the large front window, I couldn't believe what I saw. Standing together in front of a plain white backdrop were two figures familiar to every witch and wizard in Britain. One, unmistakably Lily Evans, the woman once hailed across Europe as the Tri-Wizard Tournament champion and by all accounts, long presumed dead. The other, none other than Severus Snape, Hogwarts' notoriously stern potions master and head of Slytherin, celebrated and reviled for his role as double agent between the forces of light and dark. Lily looked radiant in a simple ivory dress, nothing like the mourning gowns we imagined her wearing. By her side, Snape's dark robes were crisply tailored, his sallow face softened by a rare, genuine smile. Between them, a small bundle of blankets suggested they weren't just a couple, they were a family. When the photographer signaled, Lily leaned her head on Severus's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm protectively around her. A second, even more surprising shot revealed two children, one toddling at Lily's skirts, the other clinging to Snape's robes. The lab technician gushed that these were the first family portraits ever taken of the once-mourned savior of Hogwarts and the enigmatic potions master himself. Rumors swirled outside the studio. Had Lily truly come back from the dead? Was this a clever disguise? Or had the Ironwood healers performed some miracle? No official statement has yet been released by the Ministry of Magic or Hogwarts School, but one thing is certain: Lily Evans's story is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more astonishing revelations. Stay tuned as we follow this extraordinary family in the days to come. What's most astonishing is that Lily Evans is holding a baby girl whose eyebrows and eyes match her own exactly. It's as plain as day, even a blind man could see it. Lily and Severus have come together, and they have a child. That also explains the timeline. She didn't wake up last April as everyone assumed. The calendar must really be 10 months further on. Lily only reappeared after giving birth and restoring her health. By rights, she should now be called Lily Snape. Still, I suspect the Hogwarts students will continue to address her as Professor Evans, just to avoid confusing her with Professor Snape. When we dug deeper, we discovered that this photograph was taken in May. But the most intriguing revelation was yet to come. Since returning from Easter break, Professor Snape's appearance seems to have undergone a complete overhaul. Gone are the gaunt cheeks and greasy hair we've grown so used to. His face is now evenly filled out, his complexion clear and pale, and his hair smooth and lustrous. Yet in that May photograph, he looks precisely as he always has, dark-circled, lean, and unmistakably the same reserved, severe Severus Snape. Or is he? It's hard to believe, but the rumor is that Professor Severus Snape has concocted a miraculous Aus beauty potion, one that perfects skin tone, revitalizes hair, and slimly sculpts the figure. Word is, he's been taking it himself in secret. Imagine the headlines if magazines like Beauty Weekly or Practical Potion Master could interview him. "Harry, is this for real?" Terry asked, leaning closer to the photograph. "Did Snape really invent a beauty potion?" Harry glanced at the picture, his expression flat. "It's Muggle magic, photo editing. They can fake anything these days." Anthony chimed in eagerly. "Do you think you could get your hands on some of that potion, Harry? Just a bottle?" Michael and Terry nodded in agreement, excitement in their eyes. Harry's knuckles turned white around the edges of the photo. He took a steadying breath. "Look, I'm sorry, but I've got no idea about any beauty potion, and frankly, I don't want to. So, Terry, my apologies." Before the others could press further, Ron sprang to his feet and planted himself between Harry and the group. "All right, that's enough. Back off. Harry just wants to be left alone." Neville frowned as he watched Ron's protective stance. He'd seen loyalty before, but something in Ron's posture and in the tension in his shoulders told him this was more than just friendship. There was something deeper at play, and Neville wasn't sure he liked what it implied. As he spoke, Ron reached over and grabbed a handful of hair at the nape of Harry's neck. Chapter 783, Ron enters the Hogwarts infirmary. Ron Weasley hurried down the torchlit corridor toward the infirmary, clutching a stack of parchment and quill. He was expecting a routine visit, maybe a sprained ankle from Quidditch practice, or one of Seamus's questionable experimental potions gone wrong. What he got instead was the buzz of gossip so potent it rivaled a swarm of Cornish pixies. As he approached Madame Pomfrey's door, a cluster of third-years blocked his way, voices low but urgent. "So, Harry Potter has another sister," a Ravenclaw first-year whispered, eyes wide. "If you work backward from today, she must have been conceived at the very start of last summer vacation," another chimed in. "Unbelievable," a Hufflepuff muttered. "Professor Evans must have awakened during the break, and Harry had no idea?" "Apparently not," a Slytherin drawled, shrugging. "Didn't you see how genuinely happy Harry looked in April? That was no act." "Poor Harry," came a soft voice from the back. "He only found out about Evans's return when the rest of us did." "Honestly, Evans is full of surprises," one student scoffed. "She meets a man, and suddenly her own son doesn't cross her mind." "I heard the baby's already here, but Professor Evans skipped Mei Ling's arrival ceremony," another added. "Are you insane?" someone hissed. "The child was probably still in the womb when Mei Ling showed up." "Exactly," a Ravenclaw said with a smirk. "They clearly wanted to keep her hidden. Who'd ever expect a wizard to traipse into a Muggle photo studio for a family portrait?" By the time Ron slipped past them into the infirmary, the rumor mill had churned across every hallway and common room at Hogwarts. Even in the sickbay, the air hummed with whispered theories. Ron paused at the threshold, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. If his afternoon wasn't about to get complicated, he'd eat his wizarding hat. London Neighbours was about as obscure as a magazine could get. Barely anyone subscribed to it. Michael had only signed up because his cousin worked there. And yet, by Sunday morning, its tabloid editions were everywhere at Hogwarts. In the Great Hall, plates and cutlery sat beside piles of the paper. Even Ravenclaw's Tywin used sheets of London Neighbours to wrap his breakfast sandwich before retreating to the common room. Harry stared at the headlines with growing dismay. He'd already suspected that Snape, perhaps in collusion with his mother, had leaked the story about the mysterious child he'd found. But he hadn't expected it to break school-wide overnight. Not a single hour to catch his breath, to sort out his own thoughts, before everyone knew. It was humiliating. Even at Draco's birthday party that evening, Harry couldn't muster more than a strained smile. Draco noticed Harry's pale expression and slipped away from the other students. He led Harry down a dim corridor to an empty classroom in the castle's basement. "You look like you'd vanish if someone asked you a question," Draco murmured, closing the door behind them. "Go rest for a while. I'll handle things out there." Harry wanted to protest, but exhaustion tugged at his eyelids. He nodded once and sank onto a dusty bench. Draco paused in the doorway, concern softening his usual cool reserve. "I'll be back soon," he promised. Alone in the half-lit classroom, Harry let his shoulders slump. All he could think was, why did they have to rush the story? At least give me a chance to figure out what to do next. But for now, he would take Draco's advice and rest, because tomorrow, the whole school would be talking. He understood perfectly well. Waking up one morning to the shock of suddenly having a younger sibling was nothing new in Slytherin. Many parents there used the gland growth potion to expand their families. They piled up formula and bottles, braced themselves for sleepless nights. Crabbe and Goyle's parents were just like that. "I'm not that fragile," Harry said, shaking his head. He swept his gaze over the lavish spread before them, caught Draco's worried look, and ticed the sympathetic expressions on the unfamiliar Slytherin faces clustered at the table. They'd come for Draco's birthday, yet couldn't help pitying Harry, the solitary guest. He forced a small smile. "By the way, where are Ron and the others?" Draco frowned. He'd invited students from Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor, Hannah, Lavender, and of course Harry, to celebrate together. Yet only Harry had shown up. Ron, who was practically Harry's shadow, was nowhere to be seen. Ginny, too, was absent. Unheard of, given how often she sought Harry's company. "That idiot Ron," Harry muttered, "did something this morning that left them no time to come." Draco's eyes narrowed. What happened? Harry's throat tightened at the memory he'd worked so hard to bury. That very morning in the Great Hall, Ginny had discovered Ron's carefully wrapped package, and everything had changed. Breakfast in the Great Hall was already in full swing when Neville slipped into the Ravenclaw line, clutching an odd little vial. Inside shimmered the true catalyst of the past few days' chaos, the transgender childbearing potion. Neville's cheeks flushed as he held it up. "I thought you were just collecting Harry's hair for a prank," he muttered to himself, "but this is on a whole other level." At the long Ravenclaw table, Hannah and Lavender, who'd caught wind of yesterday's explosive argument, paused mid-toast. Over sips of pumpkin juice, they'd pieced together Ron's strange obsession with Harry's hair, the furious quarrel that followed, and now this mysterious potion. Determined to see the evidence with their own eyes, the two slipped away once they'd finished eating and hurried toward Gryffindor Tower. They found Ginny already waiting outside Harry's dormitory door, her expression unreadable. With a decisive tap of her wand, Ginny blew open the door and began gathering every last strand of hair Ron had stashed in little glass vials, Ron's trophies, as Ginny called them, into a black canvas pouch. Before anyone could protest, a dazed figure drifted through the open doorway. Ron stood there, arms limp at his sides, eyes glazed over, still under the self-inflicted effects of a botched petrification charm. He hovered like a puppet on invisible strings. Ginny's eyes hardened. "Time for judgment," she said, and raised her wand. In a flourish she'd been practicing in secret, she invoked the bat spirit charm. A swirl of spectral bats burst forth, fluttering around Ron. They guided him, surprisingly gently, down the corridor toward the school hospital. Just then, Professor McGonagall appeared at the stairwell mouth, wand at the ready. The bats vanished in an instant, scared, and Ron slumped to the floor at her feet. McGonagall turned to Ginny, her gaze stern. "Detention," she declared, "for unauthorized use of advanced magic." Ginny offered a curt nod and followed the head of Gryffindor down the corridor. Hannah and Lavender hovered anxiously as Neville led the still half-petrified Ron inside the hospital wing. Bundles of white bed curtains rustled as they eased him onto a comfortable couch by the window. Harry lingered at the door, his stomach twisting. After all he'd endured, coming so close to fatherhood against his will, he wasn't sure he could face another sickbed scene. At that moment, a reminder of normalcy tugged at him. It was Draco Malfoy's birthday. Harry retrieved the small pile of gifts Neville, Hannah, and Lavender had pressed into his hands earlier. With a nod of apology to his friends, he slipped out of the hospital wing, determined to deliver presents and observe the day's celebrations, anything to reclaim a bit of his old life. Draco had no idea what everyone else was already whispering about. That morning, he'd turned an unused classroom into the venue for his birthday party, and Neville had discreetly slipped in a few muffling and ears-blocking charms so nobody outside could eavesdrop. To anyone passing by, it all looked like a harmless prank. After all, Ron's best mate Harry and his girlfriend Lavender had stormed off in a huff early, and the culprit was none other than Ron's own sister, Ginny. So why make a fuss? Draco leaned forward, curious. Harry frowned, looking distinctly unhappy. It's hard to explain, he muttered, but if you really want to know, you'd better brace yourself. Did Ron do something stupid again? Draco guessed instantly. Stupider than you can imagine, Harry replied, scowling. Ginny hit him with a bat spirit charm. He's been stuck lying completely still all day. Once Professor McGonagall figured out what happened, she locked Ginny in her office for a few hours as punishment. Draco's eyes went wide. Merlin's stinky socks! What on earth did he do to deserve that? Draco pressed his forehead to the frosted glass of the staff room door, blinking in disbelief. Ginny's being told to hang out with Mei Ling in her office, he growled. For someone itching to prove she's the perfect mum, this is more of a reward, not a punishment. Pansy, who had crept up behind him, was about to pat his shoulder when she froze. This is a nightmare, she whispered. Inside, the Hogwarts staff lounge gleamed with rich, dark paneling. Rows of high-backed chairs lined the walls, and at the far end stood Molly Weasley, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Snape, each head turned expectantly toward that very door. Minerva, Molly began, taking a steadying breath as she addressed McGonagall. You sent for me so urgently. What's going on? She shot a puzzled look at Snape. Aside from their shared duties in the Order of the Phoenix, she and the Potions Master had little connection, and as far as she knew, her children, Ginny, Ron, Fred, George, and Percy, had no dealings with him beyond the classroom. Snape cleared his throat, equally bemused. He'd assumed McGonagall wanted Molly's parenting expertise to correct his own. After all, no one raised better-behaved offspring than Molly Weasley. Suddenly, the door swung open. Everyone tensed, bracing for whatever surprise lay beyond, unaware that the day's real ordeal was only just beginning. Even if Professor McGonagall hadn't sparked this whole predicament, he would have turned to Molly for advice all the same. But why stop there? There was still one more person he needed to see. Who could it be? Special thanks to all the students at Maple Book Friends for your monthly support and heartfelt gratitude to everyone who recommends and subscribes. Chapter 312. Professor McGonagall's Proposal. Albus Dumbledore pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into McGonagall's office. He was clad in a sumptuous dark blue robe embroidered with azaleas. He removed his pointed hat, letting his long silver hair fall over his shoulders, and looked around with a curious smile. Minerva, you summoned us? He asked. Professor McGonagall stood behind her desk, composed but clearly troubled. She glanced at each of the assembled professors, Molly Weasley, Severus Snape, Ron Weasley among them, then took a measured breath. There's something I've been tolerating for far too long, she began. Someone in this room has failed to set a proper example, and as a result, these awful incidents keep happening at Hogwarts, over and over again. Dumbledore blinked. Me? He said, bewilderment cracking his voice. His eyes flicked first to Molly, then to Snape. The pieces clicked into place. Severus had pioneered that potion of reincarnation, using hair as genetic material to create a living child, and Ron, in his eagerness, had tried to replicate it and wound up in St. Mungo's. But what did any of that have to do with him? He'd long suspected Severus's true motive, an obsession to have a child with Lily, and yet here he was, lounging in the headmaster's office with a melon wedge in hand, utterly clueless as to why Minerva had gathered them all. McGonagall let her gaze rest on Dumbledore. It's all connected, she said quietly. Each of these reckless experiments chips away at our integrity and endangers our students. I propose we establish an oversight committee immediately, chaired by you, Albus, to review any magical research involving living tissue. From now on, no experiment of this kind may proceed without departmental approval. Dumbledore set down his melon slice, nodding solemnly. He could feel the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders once more, but he would not refuse Minerva's proposal. Not tonight. Professor McGonagall slammed her parchment onto the desk, her emerald eyes flashing with indignation. Why do you refuse to take responsibility? She demanded. Because of you, Sirius harbored forbidden feelings for James. When Lily learned the truth, after her resurrection, she fled into Snape's arms. Driven by his own vanity, Snape even perfected that cross-species fertility potion. From it sprang the child you and Grindelwald conceived. Emboldened, Snape used the same inspiration to father a child with Lily. And Ron, poor Ron, soaked up all these twisted lessons. He ignored his own girlfriend, clung to Harry, and when he discovered Lily and Snape's secret offspring, he stole Harry's hair to try and create a child with him. Ginny nearly died giving birth. Does none of this lie at your feet? You are the wellspring of every sin, the architect of every betrayal. At this, Dumbledore cleared his throat softly. Minerva, love itself is pure. Snape, standing by the window, let out a derisive laugh. Pure? What have I to do with Ron's folly? That was his own choice. Mrs. Weasley, who had been standing near the door, looked from one professor to the other in bewilderment. Minerva, Professor, what's happened to Ron? Why is everyone talking in riddles? McGonagall whirled on her. Innocent. Don't invoke love to excuse indecision. If you never truly loved any of these men, then say so. Don't prey on their hearts by leading them on. You did it to James. You did it to Harry. You did it to Sirius. They are all your disciples in this folly, and it all starts with you. Professor McGonagall sat rigidly behind her desk, her sharp gaze sweeping the assembled faces in her office. Under the guise of brotherhood, dark and forbidden feelings had taken root among her students. Both Sirius Black and Ron Weasley had fallen prey, but in very different ways. Ron, with Ginny by his side, might yet be saved. Sirius, she feared, was hopelessly lost. And you, Severus? McGonagall's voice rang out as she turned to the potions master. Snape's usual sneer wavered beneath her glare. Stealing another person's hair to manufacture children, it's despicable. If it weren't for Lily's sacrifice, you would already be serving time in Azkaban. For the first time, Snape looked uncertain. McGonagall rose, crossed the room, and gently took Molly Weasley's hand. Molly, I'm so sorry you've had to hear any of this. But we can't pretend it didn't happen. Ron stole Harry's hair and tried to learn Snape's darker methods, hoping to create offspring with Harry. He believed this would satisfy his own urges and bind him ever closer to Harry. Fortunately, Ginny discovered his plan in time. Ron is now in the hospital wing, recovering. Mrs. Weasley's face drained of color. She stared at her hands, trembling. How could I have raised such a boy? I know Harry's been through terrible times, but Ron can still be redeemed, McGonagall said firmly, giving Molly's hand a reassuring squeeze. He's not completely uninterested in girls. There is hope for him yet. She paused, then added quietly, and Molly, I admit I've always doubted Professor Trelawney. I called her a liar, but even I cannot deny that her insight, her ability to see into a person's soul, was chillingly accurate this time. Molly exhaled, her shoulders sagging. You really believe her? McGonagall nodded. I do. Now our task is clear. We must help these boys find their way back from the darkness before it's too late. Although she regarded Lavender as her most promising pupil, Professor McGonagall had never stood in the way of her romance with Ron. After all, Ron Brown's feelings were sincere. He wasn't using Lavender as a convenient shield. McGonagall offered Lavender a reassuring smile. You're doing just fine, dear. Trust yourself. At that moment, Dumbledore raised a slender finger. May I say something? Go ahead, McGonagall replied, her tone brisk as she turned toward him. Are you discriminating against us gay folk? McGonagall shot back, her eyes flashing. Why do you suggest our love is immoral? Dumbledore's shoulders slumped, and he looked genuinely pained. I never said being gay is wrong, but I was speaking of two particular men, Ron and Sirius. Both have behaved dishonorably. Neither ever owned up to their true feelings, Ron with his unacknowledged obsession with Grindelwald, and Sirius with his infatuation for James Potter. Instead, they each tossed flirtations at witches. Ron even courted me at one point, just to disguise the fact that they weren't interested in women. He paused, choosing his words. When I confessed my own feelings to Grindelwald, I met nothing but clichés and excuses, just because he refused to admit he didn't care for women. Sirius, too, knew James's heart belonged to Lily, yet he still spent hours at the Potter's house, wandering in and out as if it were his own. He pressed James to name him secret keeper, convinced it was his right. Only later did I realize they'd crossed the line, so I suggested Peter Pettigrew at random. No one imagined they'd choose a coward like him. Silence fell. McGonagall's jaw clenched, but even she could not deny the weight of Dumbledore's words. Lavender, watching intently, felt a new understanding blossom. True love demands honesty, no matter how difficult. And perhaps by observing these mistakes, Ron and Sirius might yet find the courage to acknowledge their heart's true desires. Professor McGonagall's eyes narrowed as she fixed her gaze on Dumbledore. Mrs. Weasley sat nearby, pale and shaken, still struggling to make sense of the news. At that moment, Snape rose from his chair. "Minerva," he said quietly but firmly, "you didn't call us here just to assign blame. We need a solution. Tell us, what do you propose? You have our full support." Dumbledore bobbed his head in eager agreement, relief evident in his expression. McGonagall took a deep breath and began, "This situation is unprecedented, but we know the facts. The potion in question, what some have dubbed the transgender fertility draught, allows its user to carry a child conceived from another person's genetic material. Once taken, the ocean cannot be undone. The resulting child is biologically tied to the genetic donor, while the legal mother is the potion's user. Under ordinary circumstances, that raises a host of legal and ethical questions: parental rights, the donor's consent, inheritance, and so on. However," she paused, looking around the room, "in this particular case, the relationship between the donor and the potion's user is neither clandestine nor adversarial. There is genuine affection, indeed, love, between them. Given that, I believe we can set aside the usual red tape and focus on what really matters: the well-being of the mother-to-be, the rights of the genetic donor, and most importantly, the welfare of the child." She leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "So I ask you now, how shall we formalize this arrangement? How do we ensure everyone's consent is properly documented and that the child receives full legal recognition, with the blessing of both biological and birth parents, without dragging them through months of litigation?" Silence fell over the office as each of them considered the question. At last, Mrs. Weasley cleared her throat. "If that's truly their wish," she said softly, "then I see no reason to deny it. They love each other, and this child deserves all the protection the magical world can offer." Snape inclined his head. "Very well. Let us proceed with drafting the necessary agreements and registering the child's birth. I will oversee the legal documentation." Dumbledore smiled, a look of pride mingling with his relief. "Excellent. Then let us move forward, swiftly and with discretion." As their plan took shape, the tension in the room eased. Together, they would navigate the uncharted territory of magical fertility law and ensure that love and responsibility, not bureaucracy, would govern the life soon to come. Minister Carmichael rose, clearing his throat as he addressed the assembled members of the Wizengamot. "Colleagues," he began, "recent research reveals that active hair follicles, or indeed almost any living tissue, can serve as viable sources of genetic material. In other words, with enough nerve, caution, and shall we say, moral flexibility, a person could steal another's tissue and conceive a child carrying that individual's DNA. It's as simple as gathering ingredients for Polyjuice Potion. Horrifying, isn't it? This isn't mere scandal or gossip. It's a profound violation of ethics and basic civil liberties. Imagine infants being born in dark alleyways or back rooms, their very existence traced to discarded hair clippings or fingernail filings. After all, none of us is immune to hair loss, and who safeguards their nail trimmings? The logistics of proper disposal alone are nightmarish." A low murmur spread through the chamber. From the front bench, Albus Dumbledore leaned forward. "Minister Carmichael," he said softly, "surely you do not propose an outright ban on these fertility potions? Remember, not every wizarding family is as exceptionally fertile as the Weasleys. Many couples depend on magical aid to conceive." "It is not a ban, Professor," Carmichael replied firmly. "It is a registration system. Anyone seeking to purchase such a potion must file an application, both the individual who will carry the child and the person supplying the genetic material. Any transaction without prior registration will incur strict penalties. Moreover, I recommend that the Hogwarts house elves conduct a routine health inspection on every newborn witch and wizard the moment they awaken to ensure no illicit magic has been involved." Silence settled over the chamber as members of the Wizengamot exchanged uneasy glances, pondering how best to balance the promise of regulation against the risk of overreach. Be sure to clear away any stray hairs and other bodily waste. Chapter 313, Management Methods for Transgender Birth Potions. Chapter 785, Management Methods for Transgender Childbirth Potions. Monday, 9 a.m. Harry Potter awoke to the familiar rush of magic pulsing through his body, the sensation traveling along his nerves until it reached his mind. He opened his eyes to find two enormous, tennis ball-sized orbs staring at him. One look at that lopsided grin, and he knew instantly who it was. Dobby! The house elf practically leapt for joy. Professor Dumbledore has given us a new task. We're to help the students here at Hogwarts by cleaning their beds every day. You know, we used to do it only once a week. Now it's going to be every single day. What an inspired decision. We suggested daily service before, but it was turned down. They said it was overkill, that the students wouldn't appreciate it. How odd. Isn't a clean bed something everyone appreciates? Harry swung his legs out of bed and sat up. Dobby, did Dumbledore say exactly what he wants us to clean? Harry Potter is simply brilliant, Dobby declared, his eyes shining brighter than ever. Dumbledore was very specific. Every hair on the bed, mattress, sheets, blankets, must be removed. Any stray hairs on the floorboards, under the bedposts, even on the windowsills must go. No speck of dust or clump of hair can remain, but our house elf magic is more than up to the task. Harry couldn't help but smile. With Dobby's enthusiasm and the house elf's magic, there was no doubt the students' beds would be the cleanest in the wizarding world. We've always done it this way. Why is Dumbledore making such a fuss? Say no more. Dobby is leaving. Though Dobby would have loved to stay, he still had other duties to attend to. With a crackling pop, he vanished from sight. Moments later, there was a faint tapping at the dormitory window. Harry turned to see Hedwig perched outside. He tapped his wand against the glass, and the window slid open. The snowy owl flew in gracefully, alighted on his shoulder, and nibbled his earlobe in a fond gesture, then dropped a rolled-up parchment into his waiting hand. Harry led Hedwig to her silver-painted perch beside his bed and unrolled the parchment. It was the morning's Daily Prophet. He glanced at the clock, nearly 9 o'clock. Everyone else in the dormitory must already be in the Great Hall taking their defense against the dark arts exam. Of course, the windows were closed now. Nobody left them open for daylight activities, only for sleeping. Hedwig, by some uncanny bond, had known exactly when Harry awoke and when to make her delivery, just as she always did. Harry smiled at the thought, though he chided himself for dwelling on something so trivial when he had an exam of his own to prepare for. Nevertheless, he settled back, newspaper in hand, to catch up on the day's news. Harry stared at the Daily Prophet's headline and felt his world tilt. The article on page 2 introduced a term he'd never imagined seeing in print: transgender fertility potion. As he read the ministry's announcement of its new measures for the management of transgender pregnancy potions, memories of the past week slammed into him. If Ginny hadn't discovered that vial, Harry reminded himself, he'd be preparing for fatherhood all over again, this time by Ron. Just thinking of it made his stomach churn. The child, whoever it was still with Ron. Even now, Harry half expected to wake from a nightmare. The prophet's report, however, hinted at something more. It noted that late yesterday evening, the office of Arthur Weasley, director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was still ablaze with light long after normal working hours. Underneath, the caption quoted Weasley, "We drafted this regulation as soon as reports of transgender fertility potions emerged. It was no overnight job." But the photos told a different story. One picture showed Mr. Weasley dashing across the ministry courtyard in his street clothes, folders clutched tight. Another caught his office at 2 in the morning, parch, mints and quills scattered across his desk. The third was by far the most revealing. Weasley deep in conversation with Professor Snape, accompanied by Harry's mother and 2 small children. Taken together, the images raised awkward questions. Why the late-night sessions? What was discussed in hushed tones behind closed doors? And how did Harry's own family get drawn into this puzzle? As whispers swirled through Diagon Alley, one thing was clear. The minister's explanation didn't add up. The wizarding world would want and deserve the full story. Chapter X, The Forbidden Conception. An anonymous insider, who insists on remaining unnamed, has come forward with a bombshell revelation. The child currently in Professor Snape's possession was conceived by none other than Snape himself, using a rare fertility potion he originally developed for transgender witches and wizards. Even more shocking, Snape pioneered a process to clone an entire genome from a single strand of hair, specifically Lily Potter's hair. What most witches and wizards would find impossible, Snape, as the potion's inventor, accomplished with ease. Armed with that child, he boldly whisked Lily away from James's side. The audacity of it. Famed gossip columnist Rita Skeeter pressed for details. "But Professor," she asked, "wasn't Mrs. Potter unconscious at the time? Why didn't you simply take Lily directly while she lay under the sleeping draught?" Her source bristled at the question. Snape would never violate her in such a crude way. To him, Lily is a goddess, impervious to violation, even in slumber. Instead, he resorted to a forbidden incantation descended from Salazar Slytherin's lineage, a subtle constriction charm that shrinks and isolates hair follicles without leaving a trace. With that single, invisible strand of Lily's hair, he reconstructed the child's entire genetic blueprint. At this confession, the room erupted in stunned outrage, and the interview came to an abrupt close. Though our informant's identity remains a secret, his professorial credentials and intimate knowledge of Severus Snape's complex relationship with Lily Evans lend chilling credibility to every word. The most important passage in the newly issued Regulations for the Oversight of Transgender Conception Potions reads as follows. Any unauthorized use of another person's bodily tissue to substitute genetic material, or the clandestine manufacture of cross-gender fertility potions intended to conceive children, is strictly prohibited. Persons who employ such illicit materials will be fined 500 gold galleons and face up to 3 years imprisonment. Individuals caught stealing tissue will serve an additional 1-year sentence. Potion makers found in violation are subject to a 1,000 galleon fine and at least 3 months behind bars. If a single person commits multiple of these offenses, or if their actions overlap, all applicable penalties will be imposed cumulatively. These rules take effect immediately upon publication. From this, it's clear that the rumors our readers have circulated, using something as simple as a strand of hair to replace genetic material, is not mere gossip, but a genuine practical concern. Given how rapidly this decree was drafted and released, one cannot help but suspect it was prompted by Professor Snape's controversial experiments at Hogwarts. The ministry clearly felt an urgent need to rein in whatever he was up to. But that's just the first regulation. We'll turn to the next one shortly. Serious, honestly. Harry's voice held a note of mild reprimand, yet underneath it lay something far warmer, relief, even gratitude. For the very first time on this perilous path, where he found himself forced to confront Snape and protect his mother's memory, Harry realized he was not alone. Harry sat frozen, the Daily Prophet spread out before him. The cheering mob that had greeted the exposé, of course it was Sirius Black. Even Sirius wouldn't have dared run a story sabotaging Severus Snape, Hogwarts potions master and a trusted member of the Order of the Phoenix, without to help. Rita Skeeter had written the piece, but she couldn't have published it alone. Only one person had the clout to make Arthur Weasley burn the midnight oil and crank out urgent new regulations for tomorrow's paper, Albus Dumbledore. A sudden chill seized Harry. When had Dumbledore found out? If it had been before today's revelations, how had he managed to keep such a straight face during their lessons? Harry hadn't held anything back, aside from the things involving Ryan. Yet Dumbledore hadn't pressed him for details. Why? He exhaled, folding the prophet and setting it aside. In a strange way, he pitied Snape and his mother. Their names were plastered across every headline, yet Harry was convinced this was exactly what they'd planned from the start. The incriminating photograph wasn't a random leak, it was part of their design. They never meant to keep the child hidden, they just needed the right moment to unveil him. Harry's arrival had been that moment. Chapter 314, Delayed Casting. A restless crowd of first- and second-year students pressed around the heavy oaken door of Professor Snape's dungeon office, their voices echoing off the stone walls. "Why hasn't Snape come out yet?" one boy muttered. Another peered through the narrow glass pane. "Did you see how pale he is? It's like he inhaled every last scrap of life force in the room." "Life force?" someone scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Don't worry about the details," a third chimed in. "I just want to know how to get that cut, even if it only lasts a day." A fourth student hesitated. "Aren't we afraid of house point deductions?" "Relax," came the confident reply. "The term's almost over. They won't dock us now." But what about Harry Potter and his friends in first year? They got punished for less. That was a special pardon from the headmaster. Don't count on another one. Exactly. Maybe one of us should become headmaster. Meanwhile, Harry Potter had come down the dim corridor to see his mother. Instead, he found the usual hush of the dungeons replaced by this excited tangle of underclassmen, some proudly wearing badges of the Harry Potter Club. He paused, uncertain how to slip past without attracting attention, and reluctantly turned away, deciding that if Snape wouldn't emerge soon, he'd have to find another way to speak with his mother in peace. Harry had always prided himself on his fitness, but today he moved with uncanny speed, thanks in part to the wind charm Dumbledore had shown him. In a blur of motion, he covered ground faster than any ordinary wizard could, and before he even realized it, he was standing at the very edge of the Forbidden Forest, just steps from the Black Lake. A moment of stillness then. Thump! The water erupted as something shot skyward. Harry's fingers twitched toward his wand, but he froze. It wasn't a natural creature rising from the depths. From the waist down, it was a swimmer in black trunks, and above the water sat the sleek head of a shark. "Crumb?" Harry asked, surprised. He recognized the trunks immediately, black with Victor's face printed on the leg, the same pair Ron had jokingly claimed belonged to his friend. The shark head shivered like a mist, then resolved into human features. Victor Krum, his sharp, aquiline nose unmistakable. He stood dripping at the water's edge, staring at Harry with amused curiosity. "How did you know they were mine?" Krum asked, eyebrow raised. Harry cleared his throat, trying to sound nonchalant. "The trunks gave it away. Anyone who forgoes the standard underwater snorkel during the dive practices is immediately recognized as a competition swimmer, easy to spot in their black and yellow dive suits." Before he could think better of it, Harry blurted, "Mind if I join you?" Victor Krum extended his right hand, and for a moment the air between them grew tense. Harry hesitated, then shook his head. "No, thanks. Are you part of some inner team?" Krum looked at him for a long beat, then gave a slight nod. Harry leaned in, curiosity piqued. "Does this have anything to do with Irvis?" It wasn't a wild guess. Ever since arriving at Durmstrang, Krum had been a loner, shunned by nearly everyone except for that one Slytherin girl he dated at the Yule Ball. Then Irvis had arrived and become his one friend, his constant companion in every class and activity, just like Harry and Ron. And now Irvis was gone. Harry felt a sudden twinge of longing for Ron, standing here all alone. Krum cleared his throat. "You're right. A breathing charm isn't enough. We have to dive down to the very bottom of the Black Lake ourselves and see what's really there." "Irvis disagrees," I said, shaking my head. "He thinks all he needs is a bigger practice pool. But since we're officially competing now, we can't let anyone figure out how we're breathing underwater. So tell me, Harry, whose opinion do you trust more, Irvis's or yours?" Krum frowned, arms crossed. "Have you ever heard the tale of the pony crossing the river? To a squirrel, a rushing curl, NT is a death sentence. To a buffalo, it's nothing more than a shallow stream brushing its knees. Irvis isn't like us. He claims to see the future. He doesn't bother scouting the terrain in person. Instead, he conjures a vision of what's coming and picks the perfect plan from that. For him, choosing the right spell for use underwater is more critical than mapping the shore." Harry tilted his head. "A spell cast underwater? Does the medium really change its effect?" I nodded. "Absolutely. Nearly all our spells are designed to manifest in air. Water alters their shape and power. Take the Extractum charm, for example." I paused, letting the thought settle. In midair, it tears objects apart. Underwater, its force dissipates, warping into currents of swirling debris. Every enchantment behaves differently once it hits the water's resistance. If Irvis can anticipate that, he'll have a commanding advantage, provided we don't find a way to surprise him first. In midair, this spell's force can wrench objects from someone's grasp, or even push them apart through internal repulsion. Cast it in water, and it coalesces into a towering column of scalding steam. Aside from mastering that elemental shift, your next tasks are to perfect delayed casting and silent incantations. I raised an eyebrow. Silent spells we've already covered. No problem there. But what exactly is delayed casting? The instructor smiled. Delayed casting ties directly to how we channel magic. Think of your muscles. After enough practice, you don't consciously think about each finger movement when you lift a spoon to your mouth. Your body remembers the motion. Magic is no different. The source of our power, call it the mana well, retains an imprint of every spell we learn. That mnemonic imprint lets you cast silently. You recite the incantation in your mind, tap into the spell's memory, and release it without uttering a word. I nodded slowly. Okay, that makes sense. But what about delayed casting? He leaned forward. Delayed casting means separating the spell's formation from its release. First, you perform the full incantation and gestures to shape the magic. At that moment, the spell exists in the air, fully charged but waiting. Instead of following through immediately, you park the spell there, firm and complete, yet unlaunched. You can then step away, make a new gesture, channel mana again, or cast another spell entirely. When the moment is right, you simply direct willpower at the dormant spell to trigger it. So it's like preparing multiple spells in advance, all held in reserve? Exactly. By layering spells, charging them in succession without releasing them, you weave a conveyor belt of magic. When you're ready, you unleash them one after another, or even simultaneously. It takes disciplined control over your mana, but once mastered, your offensive and defensive options multiply dramatically. I let that sink in. Silent incantations tapped into the mana well's memory. Delayed casting turned each spell into a stored charge. Together, these techniques would let me control the battlefield in ways I'd only just begun to imagine. While submerged, even sustaining the breathing charm demands a steady portion of our mental energy. If we attempt back-to-back silent spells, the strain can destabilize the very magic that keeps us alive underwater. That's why we rely on a delayed casting technique. First, we invest part of our mental reserves to initiate the silent spell. Then we release it in rapid succession, dozens of times per breath. This high frequency of output simply can't be matched by standard silent incantations. Harry explained this as naturally as if he were discussing a daily chore. He'd fought many times under the waves, most notably in the dream world, where he couldn't breathe at all without magic. Though he never found an enchantment to grant normal underwater respiration there, his combat instincts proved flawless. Victor Crumb studied him with a mix of skepticism and awe. "So you can really do this?" he asked. "I don't doubt your skill. We heard tales of Voldemort unleashing a continuous stream of green deathlight against an entire squad of Aurors. That must have been this technique, but I've never seen it in person. Are you sure you can pull it off?" Harry met his gaze without hesitation. Fury burned in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I'll do it." "Expelliarmus!" Harry bellowed, and a scarlet jet of light leapt from the tip of his wand. Then, without another incantation, he began to swivel his wrist in effortless arcs. His wand transformed into something resembling an automatic rifle, spitting out volley after volley of crimson energy. Each beam carved a glowing path through the air before striking the forest branches around them with sharp, crackling reports. Limbs and twigs splintered and tumbled to the ground in a steady cascade. Victor Crumb's eyes widened in shock as he counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. He swallowed hard. That was 3 seconds. In that time, you've blasted out at least 20 Expelliarmus spells. How could you possibly fire that many in such a short span? Chapter 315, A Gift for Fleur Ryan, stood alone on his private balcony, the glow of candlelight dancing off the walls of the grand chamber behind him. A single golden coin spun effortlessly on his slender, pale fingertips, its edge flashing like a miniature top. After a moment, he flicked it into the air, and it landed, precisely, in Fleur's waiting palm. "How does it feel?" he asked, stepping forward through the open French doors. He offered her a teasing smile. "Your very own mansion deed. Just don't mistake it for an ordinary galleon. You'll always have as many of these as you like." Fleur said nothing. She lifted her eyes to his, and he reached out to cradle her chin with a gentle touch, brushing the tip of his finger against her lips. Her heart fluttered. She moved forward like a breeze, her silken gown whispering around her ankles. With her gaze cast down, her rosebud mouth parted in anticipation. Softly, Ryan removed the delicate lace veil that had shadowed her cheeks, as though uncovering a prized relic. He lowered his head, pressing a reverent kiss to the unveiled skin, valuing the moment like a treasure beyond price. An hour later, Ryan stretched and yawned, leaning against the balcony's marble balustrade. Fleur stepped aside, dabbing at her lips with a handkerchief. She held out a slender tablet, its screen flickering with intercepted messages. "Take a look at this," she said, her voice cool and collected. "Our so-called competitors are already trading tactics." Ryan swallowed a cough as he scanned the text. Fleur's brow rose in challenge. "Kate and Penello, no less," she added. He cleared his throat again and met her gaze. "Perfect timing," he murmured with half a grin. "I was just starting to enjoy a little peace and quiet." Fleur snorted with disdain. "Kate may be a fierce rival, but Penelope, the only thing she's got going for her is that flawless, pin-straight blonde hair. She's pleasant enough. She was even the first to introduce Ryan around, but that's about it." "Penelope would be devastated if she heard you say that," Ryan shot back with a shrug. "Well, she can take it," Fleur replied coolly. "Besides, you two are practically best friends now, right after Kate." Ryan's shoulders lifted in a lazy shrug. "But that's not what I wanted to talk about. I'm referring to Harry and Crumb." Fleur rolled her eyes. "Another pairing of one powerhouse and one underdog. Potter's the real draw. After all, you said he ascended to godhood last April, didn't you? Even if he gave it up, he still tasted that sort of power. And Crumb, he's just a seeker." "You really should see for yourself," Ryan said, stepping forward. "Potter isn't formidable only because of his dueling prowess or spellcraft. It's his lineage, rumored to be stronger than any pure-blooded Velas, that makes him so dangerous." At that, Ryan swept his arm through the air. For a heartbeat, an afterimage flitted across the lawn before vanishing into the shadows of the forbidden forest. Then, as if drawn by some silent summons, Harry Potter materialized among them, scar, glasses, and all. In the same instant, Victor Crumb appeared at his side, shedding his rugged disguise to stand in his true form. 15 minutes later, the demonstration was about to begin, and neither Fleur nor Ryan would soon forget what they witnessed. Fleur turns her head away, idly twirling the golden chalice in her hand. "I must have picked up this method from you," she murmurs. "I still remember how, near our old hideaway by the Centaur territory, you once blasted the death curse into the rock face. You wiped out every little spider that crawled there, so many that their bodies crackled with dark magic. Back then, I thought you were mad, chanting the spell over and over to kill each one. But now I realize you only spoke the words once, then let the curse lie dormant until it activated." Ryan's face flushes. "I was only 7 at the time," he admits, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought repeating the incantation, even silently, was too much trouble, so I cobbled together, let's call it a delayed cast technique. I got disqualified for it when I turned 8. It probably has a proper name now. You must have learned it somewhere, though. I didn't know you were familiar with it." At his confession, the chalice slips from Fleur's fingers and clatters to the floor. She stares at him, astonished. "No," she says softly, "I've never heard of such a thing." Then she studies his reddened cheeks and can't help but smile. "But are you really blushing over this? Not just because you've been playing with animals like a child, then?" Ryan blinked, his voice brimming with confidence. "Playing? Hardly. I've been wielding the death curse, real black magic. How cool is that? The only downside is the bodies of my victims absorb an intense black magic aura, so they never decay. They're perfect raw material for more dark spells, and it's not like the curses used by Voldemort's Death Eaters. My version leaves no visible marks. Physically or magically, you can't tell what killed them. Most people who find the corpses simply assume the victims died of fright." Fleur sighed softly, her beautiful eyes clouding with sympathy. "No wonder you seem so untroubled," she murmured. "Dark magic at the level of an unforgivable curse twists the mind. For someone with your particular frequency, staying level-headed is actually an achievement. And it's not really your fault. Your family has been courting death for generations. Your parents died when you were young, didn't they? It makes sense you'd be drawn to the power black magic offers. I want you to understand that I have his protection," Fleur continued, her tone calm. "We're like Occlumens, wizards who master neutrality and strengthen the positive magic of the soul. We're not afraid of black magic corrupting our minds." Ryan, who had never known a word of occlumency before, fell silent. Within seconds, her eyes brimmed with tears. She threw herself into Fleur's arms, her body trembling as she sobbed. "You're the only person who's ever really seen me. No one else has." Fleur stroked Ryan's back gently, tightening her embrace. Across the room, Victor Krum was hard at work practicing the very defensive spells Ryan had abandoned when she was 8. At last, he straightened up, excitement and gratitude shining in his eyes as he faced Harry. "Harry, thank you so much for teaching me this invaluable technique, especially since we're rivals. I don't even know how to express my gratitude." For the first time, Krum's usual frown was replaced by a puzzled, almost bashful expression. "It's nothing," Harry said with a shrug. "That's what competition is for. Friendship first, contest second. Remember, this tournament exists to strengthen bonds between our countries through magical schools. Besides," he paused, a small smile forming, "it cheers me up too." Chapter X, The Value of Delay. Victor Krum wandered the Gryffindor common room like a restless shadow. He paused in front of the hearth, uncertainty etched on his face. "I didn't know who else to turn to," he admitted, voice low. "Thank Merlin you're here, Harry." Harry Potter set aside his parchment and offered Krum a seat. "Have a drink, Victor. What's troubling you?" Krum sank onto the couch, running a hand through his dark hair. "At Durmstrang, we prize raw magical power above all else. Even black magic carries no stigma. Yet we've never won a single duel at the Wizards tournament. I'd only ever heard rumors of delayed casting, a whisper among the most elite wizards, Voldemort included, but I'd never seen it for myself." He leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "After you demonstrated it in your lesson on the silent spell, I finally understood its true worth. By holding your magic in check, postponing its release, you render your incantations silent, undetectable, and no less potent. With that skill, and enough raw energy, I could stand against Grindelwald himself." Harry arched an eyebrow. "Is it really that earth-shattering? I always thought mastering the silent spell was one of the hardest things I've ever done." Victor's jaw dropped. "That's what baffles me. You make it sound so straightforward, but when you showed me the basics, I had it down in minutes." Harry frowned, genuinely puzzled. He'd expected Victor to struggle with the timing and restraint required. He had no idea why Krum had picked it up so effortlessly. What Harry didn't yet realize was that the day he taught Victor the protective magic of love, he'd inadvertently awakened a dormant gift in the Durmstrang champion, an instinctive mastery over the ebb and flow of magical energy. It was this instinct that made delayed casting come naturally to him. Krum stared at Harry, disbelief and wonder mingling in his gaze. "You're hiding something, Harry. How can I have learned this so quickly?" Harry opened his mouth, then hesitated. In the soft glow of the firelight, his own magic stirred, recalling the moment of pure care when bonds had been forged in spell work. But some mysteries, he realized, were meant to reveal themselves in time. For now he only smiled and said quietly, "I wish I knew the answer." Silence settled between them, two champions bound by shared secrets, both unaware of the deeper connection that had quietly shaped their destinies. The one major drawback of delayed casting is its sheer difficulty, far greater than any human transformation spell I've ever attempted. Had you not revealed the connection between silent incantations and delayed magic, I never would have sensed that subtle, ethereal source. And just to be clear, magic, to me, is no different from physical strength. It's simply a specialized term that sets it apart from the ordinary abilities of muggles. Chapter 316. The Party and the Road Ahead. Ryan hardly noticed when Harry and Krum fell into whispered conversation. He rested his head against Fleur's shoulder and let his thoughts drift back. From the very beginning, the moving manor had been meant as a gift to her. After all, she would eventually return to France, and it would have been a shame for the mansion to stand empty or fall into someone else's hands. Yet today, on the eve of Kate's grand Shadow World ball, was when he chose to present it. Kate had promised that this party would banish their pre-exam jitters. All four of them, Ryan, Kate, Penelope, and Fleur, were in their 7th year, and in just weeks they'd sit for the NETs, the most grueling exams in the wizarding world. To distract them, Kate conjured a dark, twisted version of Hogwarts deep within her shadow realm. Flickering torches cast grotesque shadows along rough-hewn stone floors. The ever-shifting staircases groaned and twisted underfoot. Every corridor seemed alive with menace. In this sinister setting, Ryan was cast as the big devil who had breached the castle's defenses. Across the hall, Fleur, Penelope, and Kate played the terrified students left reeling in his wake. True to form, Kate threw herself into every role. One moment, a petrified first year stifling a scream, the next a haughty prefect ordering her housemates to flee. The rest of them scattered at her command, shrieking with mock terror. Underneath the laughter, though, lay real tension. Each of them knew that no illusion, no matter how elaborate, could stop the calendar from turning or the exams from looming. Yet for one glorious evening, in a castle of shadows and shifting stairs, they let themselves be swept up in the thrill, and in the promise that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Molly Weasley had given her life to shield her children. Narcissa Malfoy, proud almost to a fault, had been compelled to yield. Lily Evans had faced down demonic forces with fearless resolve. The Patil twins, trapped in the girls' dormitory, had nowhere to run. Fleur Delacour had witnessed Kate's astonishing talent firsthand, and at last learned the dark origins of the Shadow Kingdom. And in the end, Ryan's carefully hidden gift had turned the tide in ways none could have foreseen. By evening, Harry slipped back through the portrait hole into Gryffindor Tower and made his way to the alcove where the third years always gathered. A lively debate greeted him. "I just know I bombed Defense Against Dark Magic," Lisa wailed, tossing her notes aside. "That hex aimed at me this morning was practically quivering, and I'm certain I should have deflected it straight back." Padma Patil snorted. "Lisa, your so-called anti-technology field idea is entertaining, but no force field you imagine could stop anything, from a clunky Russian warhead to a sophisticated AIM-120 missile. You must have misread the demonstration." A third student leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Well then, how do you explain why vampires never show up in mirrors?" "Easy," Padma replied, folding her arms. "Mirrors are silver-backed. Since silver is lethal to vampires, there's no reflection. Case closed." Harry grinned as he sank into a worn armchair. After the day's horrors, it was a comfort to hear nothing more terrifying than exam anxieties and half-baked theories. Professor Trelawney's eyes fluttered behind her crystal ball as she explained the latest development in vampire lore. It used to be that pure silver would reveal a vampire's true nature, and our holy silver mirrors still bear that power. But modern manufacturers have switched the backing to aluminum. No more silver, no more reliable reflections. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "So we can't trust mirrors anymore. A cursed vampire could stand right in front of you, and you'd never know." Michael exchanged a grin with Terry. "Well, Professor," he said, strolling up, "I told her my father is bound to abandon me come next term. She practically swooned. I swear I'll get top marks on this knee." Terry laughed. "You really lean into the drama, don't you?" Michael shrugged, an impish smile on his face. "You forget, my real father ran off the moment I was born. I've got nothing left to lose." When the divination lesson finally let out, Harry pushed his way through the bustling corridor and spotted Ron slouched at a corner table in the common room, surrounded by noise but clearly lost in thought. Nearby, Ginny and Neville peered toward the entrance, scanning the crowd as if tracking a latecomer. "Harry, where have you been?" Ginny rushed over, her eyes bright with impatience. Ron shifted in his seat, but stayed put, while Neville's gaze flickered with the faint glow of the Lumos charm he'd just triggered, an unspoken trick to sense Harry's arrival. Harry slipped into the empty chair between them and began outlining the rest of the day's plan. As he spoke, both Ginny and Neville interrupted more than once to voice their displeasure about lost time, rearranged schedules, and the ever-present chaos of life at Hogwarts. Ron felt almost invisible as the days slipped by, each one bringing April 24th ever closer. But with the date looming, Ginny and the others had grown silent about Harry's betrayal in aiding Crumb, and Ron's friendships were slowly mending on their own. At last, morning arrived on the 24th. Although the Triwizard match wouldn't begin until that afternoon, the Great Hall was already electric. Ravenclaw's table buzzed with excitement, and the other 6 long tables were no quieter. With exams finally behind them, everyone had time and attention to spare for the big event. Even the 7th years, who had crammed relentlessly in recent weeks, were letting loose more than anyone. After all, thanks to the tournament's schedule, They'd get to linger at Hogwarts longer than usual, a precious bonus before they scattered in search of jobs and futures. Before Harry knew it, the 7th years had transformed the hall into an impromptu dance floor. Percy, his eyes slightly red from lack of sleep, or perhaps excitement, was dressed in a flamboyant outfit Harry had never seen him wear, laughing as he twirled with a circle of older students. The air thrummed with anticipation, for the match to come and for whatever surprise the day might hold. Even a handful of Slytherin students had joined in, some of the very faces that had been dueling Gryffindors just moments before. Yet now they were swaying to the music, lost in the dance. Fred and George cheered from the sidelines, nearly drowning out the band with their shouts. Harry barely noticed the owl diving toward him until Ron gave him a sharp nudge. "Harry, look, an owl!" He sat up and watched as the bird dropped a letter at his feet. He recognized it instantly. One of Sirius Black's lucky charms, the parchment stamped with that familiar ink-smeared paw print. Lupin had explained that, back when James was playing Quidditch, Sirius used to send him good luck handprints, and after James became an animagus, the marks turned into paw prints. Harry felt a shiver. He tucked the note into his robes just as Ginny's gentle voice broke through his thoughts. "Harry, you're awfully quiet. Everything all right?" "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile. In truth, his mind had flashed to darker what-ifs. What if his father had lived? What if Sirius, ever the daredevil, pulled off some prank like Ron's earlier stunt? He shook off the uneasy thought. When he looked up again, Professor McGonagall was striding toward the Ravenclaw table, clipboard in hand, and the music swelled around them once more. Professor McGonagall appeared at their table, just as Harry was lifting a forkful of scrambled eggs to his mouth. "Harry," she said crisply, "the team needs to assemble in the conference room beside the auditorium immediately after breakfast." Harry froze, his mouth halfway open. "But Professor," he protested, "the match doesn't start until this afternoon." In his surprise, he knocked his fork, and eggs splattered across his robes. She gave him a sympathetic half-smile. "I know, Harry, but the parents and relatives of the players have been invited to watch the final here at Hogwarts. You'll have a chance to meet them before the game." She turned to Ginny. "You're welcome to join us, Miss Weasley. As for Ronald," her voice grew firm, "I'm afraid it's best if he does not." And with that, she swept away, leaving the two of them blinking after her. Harry stared after her, bewildered. Then he looked at Ginny. She won't forget that my mother's been staying at Hogwarts, will she? I can see Mum whenever I like." Ginny shrugged apologetically. "I honestly don't know, but if you're worried, we could go together later, just to be on the safe side." Nearby, Ron cringed visibly. "No thanks," he muttered. "If it were Mum calling, I'd rather not go near her." He shuddered. "Remember that berating letter she sent me after exams? Pure fire and brimstone. Thank Merlin, it was late and came with a second, milder note telling me to meet her in the empty classroom. Otherwise, I'd never have lived it down." Ginny reached over and squeezed his arm. "Well, if you think of it that way, maybe she really doesn't want to see you. Besides," she looked at Harry, her cheeks flushing bright pink. "Harry and we're engaged." Harry choked on his tea. Ron's jaw dropped. Silence fell over the table as their friends turned to stare, and Ginny hid her face in a beatific blush. At Ginny and Ron's teasing remark, Harry couldn't help but laugh. After the last of the students filed out of the Great Hall, he and Ginny strolled hand in hand toward the conference room. Chapter 789, Sudden Stop. Harry paused on the threshold of the reception room, his breath catching at the bustling scene before him. No sooner had he entered than a tall, black-haired man with decidedly sharp features, his hooked nose an echo of both Professor Snape's and Victor Crumb's, strode forward with a wide smile. "Harry Potter, I presume?" the man boomed, extending a hearty handshake. Before Harry could answer, Victor stepped up beside him. "Father, this is Harry," he said. The older man's grip was so enthusiastic that Harry had to tug gently at his sleeve to draw back his hand. Standing just behind him, Victor's mother, her thick black hair pulled into a neat bun, began speaking rapid Bulgarian. Victor translated, "She's thanking you. Without you, she says, I would have felt completely alone at school, and she's grateful for all the help you gave me during the competition." Harry managed a grateful nod as he inched his way through the crowd. To one side stood Fleur Delacour, deep in animated French conversation with her graceful mother, while her younger sister, Gabrielle, held the hand of a garrulous boy named Ryan. In the far corner, Elvis offered Harry a friendly wave before turning to converse in Portuguese with his dark-haired parents. At last, Harry spotted two more familiar figures, Mrs. Weasley and Aunt Petunia, accompanied, to Harry's surprise, by Dudley. Mrs. Weasley's face lit up in an affectionate grin. Dudley, looking awkward in his dress robes, gave Harry a timid wave. Only Aunt Petunia maintained her customary scowl. "You didn't expect to see all of us here, did you, Harry?" Mrs. Weasley teased, her eyes twinkling. Harry swallowed. This was no ordinary gathering, and it had only just begun. "My mother is here, too," Dudley announced, practically bouncing with excitement. Harry shifted uncomfortably, tightening his grip on Ginny's hand. He'd learned to shrug off Ron's ebullience, but Dudley's unabashed enthusiasm still threw him every time. "Hello, Aunt Petunia," Harry managed, offering a polite nod. Petunia returned it with cool reserve, her eyes flicking past him to Dudley and the whispering portraits lining the corridor walls. Mrs. Weasley hovered nearby, clearly ill at ease. It was no secret that she and Petunia weren't on speaking terms, but at the sight of Harry and Ginny, her face brightened. She stepped forward and gave Ginny a warm hug. In that instant, Petunia rallied. She crossed the hall in quick strides, clutched Mrs. Weasley's hand, and beamed. "Molly, oh Lily, it's so good to see you. I'll be your personal tour guide today. This is the school you've always dreamed of, isn't it? And Dudley here is doing wonderfully. He's quite the hit in Hufflepuff." She turned to her son, fussing over his shoulders. "You've grown so tall, Dudley. Though really, you ought to put on a bit more weight." Mrs. Weasley forced a polite laugh, and for a moment the tension between the two families softened. Dudley beamed, basking in the praise, while Harry exchanged a wry look with Ginny. If Aunt Petunia's tour promised anything, it would be memorable. Mrs. Weasley waved a hand toward the painting of a plump woman in violet robes that hung beside the fat lady's portrait. "That's Violet," she explained, "one of the fat lady's dearest friends. There was the night she and your father decided to take a moonlit stroll through the corridors." She smiled at Harry and Aunt Petunia, both watching the picture intently. "They didn't get back to the common room until 4 in the morning, and you should have heard the fat lady's fury. Your dad still bears the burn mark from that very evening, thanks to Housemaster Apollyon Prinlow." With that amusing bit of history shared, Mrs. Weasley turned to Petunia. "Come on, Petunia. I want you and Dudley to see the rest of the castle." Up until now, Aunt Petunia had remained stiff and reserved, but faced with the grandeur of Hogwarts, her usual hardness seemed to melt away. Harry had never seen her countenance look so animated, almost childlike. She wandered the corridor, eyes bright, drinking in every portrait, every carved gargoyle, and the polished silver of suits of armor standing guard in the alcoves. Petunia peppered Mrs. Weasley, Harry, and even Dudley with questions. What was the story behind that stern-looking centaur in the hallway? Why did the suit of armor next to the marble staircase hold its sword at such a jaunty angle? Who painted the portrait of the pirate queen down by the lake? Each answer made her lean closer, nodding as if she were memorizing a beloved spell. Their tour took them past the headmaster's office, where a softly glowing phoenix mural greeted them, onto the Gryffindor common room with its scarlet and gold furnishings and roaring fire, then through the cool, echoing Ravenclaw corridors and the cozy, honey-lit passages of Hufflepuff. Even Dudley's face softened as they peeked into his old dormitory, now cheerfully printed in Hogwarts green and silver. Finally, they paused before the heavy oaken door of Professor Snape's office. The stone lintel bore a carved frown, and a single iron knocker, shaped like a viper, glared down at them. Snape himself answered the door, his dark eyes narrowing. Harry felt the familiar prickle of unease under that murderous stare, but Aunt Petunia raised her chin and stepped inside with Dudley at her heels. When they emerged, the castle's ancient walls seemed to glow in the morning sun. Mrs. Weasley led the way outside to the lawns, where dew still clung to the grass. The air was crisp, the sky a flawless blue, and for a moment Harry thought he might wake from a dream. He could hardly believe that here, in this enchanted place, stood Aunt Petunia and Dudley, smiling, curious, and entirely at ease. It was a morning even he would remember. Mrs. Weasley led them across the lawn, pointing out the Beauxbatons' gleaming white carriage, the heavy iron-bound ship that had carried the Durmstrang students, and even the towering redwoods imported from Castrumbush. When they passed the site of the old Quidditch pitch, now a cluster of greenhouses, she heaved a sigh. "I would have loved to show Aunt Petunia a match," she murmured. Aunt Petunia flashed a self-satisfied smile. "Oh, I know Quidditch well enough," she replied. "My son is the best goalkeeper you'll ever see." A few steps later, they stood beneath the notorious Humping Willow. Mrs. Weasley's face lit up. "I planted this myself not long after I left school," she said, running her fingers along its battered trunk. Then she chuckled at the memory. "You know, it wasn't Hagrid who tended these grounds in my day. It was his predecessor, Og. He helped me more than a few times when Arthur and I were courting. If it had been Hagrid, I'm certain Headmaster Apollyon Primrose would have caught us on the spot, and we would have dined on nothing but tough old mutton for weeks." Ginny's eyes widened. "Wait, does that mean those instruments in Filch's office were actually used? Hogwarts really allowed corporal punishment?" Harry shrugged thoughtfully. "Apparently, the previous caretaker could discipline students that way. Filch can't. No wonder he's always itching to punish us. He probably feels it's unfair that, as a squib, he's barred from doing so himself." "There's no provision for corporal punishment of wizarding students," Professor Sprout reminded them as they toured the greenhouses. Aunt Petunia cocked her head at a cluster of strange, translucent pods. "Could you eat these?" she asked, eyeing the bubble pods with genuine curiosity. Ever since discovering beans, chickpeas, and especially tofu, she'd been on a quest to taste every legume imaginable. If it weren't for Dudley's limited palate, Harry suspected they'd be having hummus for breakfast. Lily bent to inspect the plant, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "No," she said, smiling. "The moment the pods touch anything solid, they burst open." A fine mist floated through the air, and Lily covered her mouth to stifle her laughter at the tiny explosions. Once their tour of the greenhouses concluded, Lily led Aunt Petunia and Harry toward the eye, Ron gates at the back of the castle. Harry's heart lifted. It could only mean one thing: Hogsmeade. "Mom, aren't we going back to the castle for lunch?" he asked. "Not today," Lily replied, looping her arm through Aunt Petunia's. "After all, your aunt rarely visits the wizarding world." They climbed into the carriage, waiting beyond the gates, drawn by silvery thestrals whose quiet presence contrasted sharply with the bubbling chaos of the greenhouse. As the carriage set off toward Hogsmeade, Mrs. Weasley, who had arranged the trip, leaned forward to explain the thestrals' peculiar habits, evidently eager to share her knowledge with their muggle guest. The moment Mrs. Weasley began describing thestrals, the skeletal, bat-winged horses visible only to those who have truly witnessed and accepted death, Aunt Petunia went pale. She sat there trembling until they clambered out of the carriage. If Mrs. Weasley hadn't shot Harry a sly wink, he'd have dismissed the whole thing as harmless trivia. Instead, he realized she was venting some long-buried anger about his childhood. The air grew uncomfortably tense. It wasn't until they stepped into Madame Puddifoot's tea shop that everyone relaxed. Mrs. Weasley and her mother fell into fond recollections of their own courtships here, and soon laughter replaced the earlier awkwardness. Weasley's mum even teased Harry about whether he and Ginny had ever slipped in for a secret date under those rose-petaled lamps. Meanwhile, Aunt Petunia had zeroed in on Dudley's love life. First, she wanted to know if he had a girlfriend. When he assured her he did not, she blanched. Apparently she'd heard a rumor that a certain red-haired boy, always lurking around Harry, once snatched a lock of Harry's hair for some bizarre potion, allegedly to, well, produce a child. The idea terrified her. Once she was finally satisfied that Dudley wasn't pining for any girls, she nervously pressed him on whether he had a thing for boys instead. Aunt Petunia cleared her throat. "I'll introduce him to her later," she said, but Dudley's puzzled expression only deepened. He couldn't make sense of her cryptic promise until, in a rare slip, she blurted out the name Ron. The moment the name left her lips, Dudley froze. Mrs. Weasley glanced sharply at Aunt Petunia, and everyone standing nearby fell silent as they realized what had happened. Petunia had just referred to Ron Weasley, Harry's red-headed best friend. An awkward stillness settled over the group. broken only when Mrs. Weasley offered a tight smile. "Why don't we eat first?" she suggested, and they all moved on to the 3 broomsticks. Over hearty bowls of stew and frothy mugs of butterbeer, the earlier confusion faded. When lunch was done, they exchanged polite farewells and set off for home, this little adventure at an end, for now. Chapter 318, Points Store. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as students gathered for the end-of-term announcements. Mrs. Weasley hovered beside Ron, biting her lip and fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "Ron, how did your exams go?" she demanded. "And what's this I hear from Ginny, that you and Lavender have broken up?" Ron let out a high-pitched squeal, half hysterical. "Mum, are you asking about my grades or Lavender?" "I want to know about both." Mrs. Weasley shot back. "Well," Ron said, shrugging, "I completely blanked on the names of those rebel goblins, so I just invented a few." Mrs. Weasley's eyes widened. "You made them up? What did you call them?" "Short Caca," Ron announced proudly, "and Long Toes Mimi. They sounded suitably goblinish. No problem." Percy, Fred, and George, who had been watching the exchange with barely concealed glee, all buried their faces in their hands. Percy groaned. "Honestly, Ron, why are you laughing?" Ron demanded, chest puffed out. "I nailed everything else." Across the hall, Aunt Petunia was perched beside Dudley at the Hufflepuff table. She beamed as whispers of admiration drifted toward her son. Zacharias Smith strolled over, a sneer on his lips. "Look at Dudley. He seems completely miserable," he taunted. Ginny's eyes sparkled. "Well, it's about time he felt the burn of hard work, isn't it?" Harry shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "You all still don't get Aunt Petunia," he remarked quietly. "She's tougher than any of you give her credit for." Aunt Petunia hovered at her son's side as a small crowd of schoolchildren gathered around him. Finally, a boy named Zacharias mustered the courage to speak. "Hello, ma'am," Zacharias began nervously. "Dudley's been bullying me all day." Petunia's eyes widened in feigned shock. "My Dudley wouldn't harm a fly," she exclaimed, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder. "He's so slight, there's no way he's been hurting anyone." Zacharias squared his shoulders. "He choked me and sat on me during recess." "Oh, he was only making sure you weren't hurt," Petunia said, cooing as she smoothed Dudley's perfectly blonde hair. "He's always been such a kind, good-hearted boy." Another classmate piped up. "He copies all our homework." Petunia laughed softly. "He's just helpful. Dudley loves checking that everyone's work is correct. He's always been so considerate." A girl folded her arms. "He flirts with us in class." Petunia's face brightened. Who could blame him? He's positively charming. Just look at that golden hair. Apollo himself never shone so brightly. She beamed, her normally sharp features softened by pride. "But he keeps hitting people," a third child protested. "He's just an energetic boy." Petunia dismissed the claim with a wave. "He was only playing rough with his friends." One more voice broke the chorus. "He tortures small animals." "Oh, nonsense," Petunia assured them. "Dudley simply worries about them. He merely examines any creature he finds to make sure it's all right." "Enough," Zacharias roared, his frustration boiling over. Without another word, he turned and stormed back into the crowd. Dudley's cheeks went pink. He stared at the ground, mortified by the spectacle of his mother's boastful defense and by the angry glare of his classmates. He had never felt so small. The entire room fell silent. Most of the students here had expected Dudley Dursley to be insufferable. After all, they'd heard Zacharias Smith's stories, but even they were stunned by Aunt Petunia's reaction. She'd practically shriveled to half her size the moment someone mentioned Dudley chatting up a fifth-year Hufflepuff. Ginny Weasley, standing beside Harry, whispered, "This can't be right. Even if Aunt Petunia has a talent for blocking any bad reports about Dudley, she's just heard that he sat on some boy's lap at the Yule Ball. Wouldn't that make her worry he's turning out like Ron?" Harry pursed his lips and tilted his head toward the other side of the hall. "Look at that girl by the punch bowl." Ginny followed, his gaze. "You mean that tall Hufflepuff? She's easily a foot taller than Dudley, with sleek red hair and, despite her beauty, a sort of gladiator glare. I heard she actually invited Dudley to dance." "Exactly." Harry leaned closer. "She made the first move, strolled right up and asked him to be her partner. In Aunt Petunia's mind, that's proof positive. Dudley must be gay." Ginny frowned. But he could just as easily be bi, right? I mean, he might like girls and boys both. She nodded toward Ron, whose pale face betrayed the force of Mrs. Weasley's mental scolding. Ron's shoulders trembled as though he were being pelted with invisible insults. Harry shook his head with a half-smile. Doesn't matter. Aunt Petunia's already made up her mind. If Dudley dances with a girl, he's definitely straight. And if he goes near a boy, well, then he's definitely not. There's no in-between. Ginny rolled her eyes. Why am I not even surprised? 4 years at Hogwarts, and some things never change. They watched as Aunt Petunia recovered her composure and marched straight toward the punch table, Dudley trailing behind like a bewildered lamb. The rest of the students exchanged sympathetic glances. Poor Dudley, caught between a scandal he didn't understand and an aunt who saw scandal in everything. Harry slipped an arm around Ginny's shoulders. Want to get us some sweets before the next dance starts? Ginny nodded, tossing a last look at Ron, still visibly suffering from his mother's psychic backlash. Yeah, and maybe we can save him some treacle tarts while we're at it. With that, they turned away, wading through hushed whispers and curious stares, determined to enjoy the Yule Ball despite Aunt Petunia's fierce brand of family loyalty. Aunt Petunia has always stood by Dudley, no matter what. Even if he'd committed murder, she'd find a way to hush it up, call in her Muggle cleaners, scrub away every trace, and insist on his innocence. She had always supported him unconditionally. Now that there was proof of Dudley's wrongdoing, even my mother had finally come forward to badmouth him. And Aunt Petunia, in her wounded pride, was already accusing my mother of jealousy, outraged that Dudley could ever be considered worse than me. Better than you, Dudley? I muttered under my breath, rolling my eyes so hard it almost hurt. Time passed. I still felt unsettled and a little bruised when Mr. Weasley led me and 4 other competitors to what had once been the Hogwarts Quidditch pitch. The moment we stepped through the grand entrance, I barely recognized the place. A towering hedge, at least 20 feet tall, ringed the entire field, and a single narrow gap served as our only way in. Inside the maze, the air was cool and shadowed. A huge, floating black screen hovered over us, visible from every angle. To our right was a small wooden hut that looked like a concession stand, but when we peered through its doorway, it was empty, just dusty shelves and a lone counter. The spectator stands were just as deserted. 5 minutes later, the first clusters of students began filing into the stands, chattering excitedly. I took a deep breath and glanced at the maze's entrance. Somewhere beyond those towering hedges lay the next stage of our challenge, and, I hoped, a chance to prove myself once more. Students streamed into the stadium, their excited chatter and echoing footsteps filling the twilight air. Above the Quidditch pitch, a giant enchanted screen flickered on, projecting Harry and the other champions for everyone to see. The sky was painted a brilliant orange as the sun slipped below the horizon. On the field, Hagrid led the way, followed by Professors Snape, McGonagall, and Flitwick. Each bore a gleaming red star, pinned high on their robes and hats, except Hagrid, whose star was stitched to the back of his heavy coat. Reaching into his vest, he produced 4 slender vials filled with a softly glowing elixir. Here are the refined light potions, crafted by your respective houses, Hagrid announced, handing one to Harry, then to Hermione, Ron, and finally Cho. Professor McGonagall stepped forward, her voice ringing clear across the hushed stadium. We will be your allies throughout this challenge, but make no mistake, this chapter is far from over. Every move you make will be broadcast live on that giant screen above. Should you wish to withdraw, or if you face any impassable obstacle, we will be notified and will come to your aid. But be warned, summoning us ends your run in the competition. She paused, scanning their determined faces. Now, do you remember your current scores? A hush fell over the crowd as the champions exchanged glances, adrenaline and anticipation crackling in the air. The game was about to resume. Harry Potter, 89 points. Victor Krum, 65 points. Fleur Delacour, 95 points. Elvas of Hufflepuff, 80 points. Those points will be your currency for this competition, Hagrid boomed as he squeezed into the great hall, and carrying a wooden display board. Spend them freely at the canteen on whatever you think you'll need. He turned the board so everyone could read. War Magic Charm, 50 points. Warrior Uniform, 20 points. Lumos Potion, 10 points. Early start time, 1 minute per 10 seconds, no limit. You all know the first two items. War Magic lets you launch your enchantment at any time or place you specify, and warrior uniforms give you enhanced protection. Hagrid explained, "Just pick what you want and shout it out. It'll appear on the screen, and the judges will signal your house to begin. Any questions?" Professor McGonagall's voice cut crisply through the murmur of the students. "You have 1 minute to make your selections." As a glowing countdown appeared on the enchanted display, Fleur Delacour raised her hand. "Excuse me, where do we change into the new uniforms? Right here? Live, in front of everyone?" A ripple of excitement ran through the stands. McGonagall offered a small, approving nod. "Your uniforms have already been custom-tailored. One flick of your wand, and you will be transformed." With that, the contestants prepared their points, and their wands, for the challenge ahead. "I'd be happy to help polish the chapter, but I'll need the full text you'd like me to revise. Could you please paste the entire chapter here? Once I have the complete passage, I'll rewrite it into clear, natural English while retaining all key plot points and details." Chapter 319, The Beginning. The cameras swung back to the stands. This time, the officiating team wasn't seated at midfield as usual. Instead, they'd taken the seats where the professors had watched the last tournament, each wearing a curious set of earpieces that drew puzzled glances from the students around them. "Hello, Ron," Professor Dumbledore greeted warmly, patting the empty bench beside him. "Shall we enjoy the match together?" Ron stiffened as he sat down. "Hello, Professor," he mumbled, shifting uncomfortably under Dumbledore's kindly gaze. A few rows below, Neville Longbottom felt a surge of relief. After Ron's unfortunate outburst earlier in the term, their friendships had grown awkward. Neville was more than glad he didn't have to sit next to his red-headed friend today. Beside him, Hannah Abbott squeezed his hand, and Neville couldn't help but laugh at his good fortune. Moments later, "Mr. Ron," Weasley's voice boomed through the stadium's speakers, echoing off the high walls. The giant screens cut to his smiling face, the only member of the officiating panel actually present at the venue, also outfitted in the same strange earpiece as his colleagues. A small speaker, wired to the great screen, crackled to life, projecting a clear, confident voice across the stadium. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final event of the Triwizard Tournament," the announcer began. "Professor Dumbledore has already explained today's rules in the auditorium and briefed our champions on the points store, so I'll get straight to the point. Here are the choices each competitor has made." He tapped his notes. "First, Harry Potter of Hogwarts. He's purchased War Magic and the champion's armor, then used the remaining 29 points to secure an early start time. Next, Victor Krum of Durmstrang. He, too, chose War Magic, and with his 15 leftover points, he opted for an early departure. Our fourth champion, Alvasi of Castra Bush representing Hufflepuff, bought the champion's armor and then spent 60 points on an early exit. And last, but by no means least, the bold Fleur Dracula of Beauxbatons. She skipped armor altogether and invested every one of her 95 points in the earliest possible start." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Based on their purchases, here's the starting order. First into the maze, Fleur Dracula of Beauxbatons, departing a full 950 seconds early, almost 16 minutes ahead of everyone else. Second, Alvasi of Castrobusha, who'll go 10 minutes early. And third, Harry Potter from Hogwarts. The stadium erupted in cheers and applause as the screen went dark, leaving only the echo of anticipation hanging in the air. One of the champions took off an astonishing 290 seconds early, nearly 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Last but not least came Victor Krum of Durmstrang, who launched himself into the maze 2.5 minutes before his official start time. A roar of applause and cheers rose from the stands, sending the Forbidden Forest birds spiraling into the darkening sky. "Now, Miss Delacour, on my whistle," called Mr. Weasley. 3, 2, 1. At the sharp blast of his whistle, Fleur Delacour swept forward in an elegant evening gown, lifting the hem of her dress as if she were out for a leisurely stroll. "Merlin's beard, she's right on time," a voice exclaimed. Indeed, the moment Fleur entered the labyrinth, she moved as though every corridor and turning were already mapped in her mind. With a single, silent flick of her wand, she dispelled each magical trap in her path. fluid, precise, unstoppable. High above, at the Beauxbons table, little Gabrielle Delacour bounced from her father's arms, clapping with delight. Fleur's parents beamed from ear to ear, proudly introducing their daughter to Victor Crumb's family seated beside them. All around the table, students of Beauxbatons rose to their feet in applause, led by the towering figure of Madame Maxime, whose statuesque presence made her particularly conspicuous in the celebration. The large viewing gallery fell silent as the judges and referees leaned forward to examine the magical displays. All the students gathered there, except the Durmstrang delegation, whose headmaster Igor Karkaroff remained motionless at the back, watched with barely concealed curiosity. Even Victor Crumb's parents, sitting in stunned quiet, seemed drawn into the spectacle. "Oh my goodness, Dracula has just blasted through the first barrier," someone gasped, their voice echoing in the high-ceilinged hall. "But she's hit the wrong channel. Look at all those crimson hats. And yet, not a hair out of place. Remarkable precision. To unleash the soft legs curse en masse like that. It's unprecedented. A truly historic moment in magical combat. This achievement will be recorded in every chronicle of spellcraft." Outside the maze arena, the three remaining champions were huddled around the giant projection screen, tense and silent. Their eyes never left the shifting lines that marked Fleur's route through the twisting hedges. Victor Crumb bent over a piece of enchanted parchment, scribbling down her every turn and incantation. "Irvus," Professor McGonagall called at last, "your turn." At her cue, Irvus slipped through an alternate entrance. Almost immediately, a second feed lit up the sky above the stands, the maze's outline blazing in spectral blue. "Very good," McGonagall murmured, folding her arms. The game was afoot once more. Irvus of Castrubsha had at last slipped into the labyrinth. Almost immediately he came to the first fork in the path, and, in a bold departure from Dracula's choice of the right-hand tunnel, he turned left. Dumbledore leaned toward Professor McGonagall and murmured, "May I make an observation?" She gave him a small nod. Harry, Ron, and Hermione all leaned forward, curious. From their vantage point in the stands, they, and the rest of the spectators, could see why entering last wasn't necessarily a disadvantage. A vast enchanted screen, hovering above the maze, projected shifting patterns of the sky dome. By matching those outlines to the maze maps they'd committed to memory, a competitor could shortcut straight to the true depressions and hidden passages. Yet Irvus deliberately ignored this obvious advantage and plunged down an uncharted corridor. Meanwhile, Dracula, calm and precise, had already located the second depression and slipped smoothly into the hidden entrance. Not far behind her, Irvus slowed at each intersection. He paused for exactly 3 seconds, as if weighing some inaudible calculation in his mind, then darted forward without hesitation. At every magically trapped corridor, his support team was ready with the precise counterspell to neutralize each ward. A sudden murmur ran through the crowd. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeakers. "Hold on. He didn't enter the depression." Gasps and whispers broke out everywhere. Did he sense some dark enchantment below? Is this part of his strategy? The stands buzzed with speculation as all eyes fixed on Irvus's disappearing silhouette, eager to see whether his daring instincts would guide him to victory or lead him astray. Harry took a deep breath as Hagrid stepped forward. "All yours, Harry," he rumbled, giving Harry's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "I know you'll do us proud." Harry managed a quick nod, though he couldn't meet Hagrid's eyes. After watching Fleur stumble through the maze, his confidence had all but evaporated. Still, he forced himself forward and plunged into the labyrinth. The moment he crossed the threshold, the outside world fell away. Towering hedges loomed overhead, their leaves weaving a tangled roof that swallowed every sound. Harry wasn't surprised. The maze was enchanted to muffle noise, and he'd be all the safer if no one could overhear whispers or warnings. He drew his wand and spoke the reversal charm under his breath. The carved wolf's skull at the tip cracked open not with a flame, but with a brilliant sphere of sunlight. In an instant, a radiant orb floated above the hedges, bathing the twisting passages in warm light. Back, in the stands, Mr. Weasley could hardly contain himself. He slapped his hand on the barrier and shouted, "Remarkable! Harry Potter has just conjured the sun, and he's our youngest champion." Beside him, Ron sprang to his feet, forgetting even Dumbledore's frown. "That's Harry's own dark arts invention," he hollered. "He perfected that curse himself." Author's note: this is just an alternate take, and just to be clear, Fleur never actually bought any war magic. Everyone else, including, eventually, Mr. Weasley, was under that impression, but it's deliberate, not an error. Kate will explain the mix-up later. P.S. A big thank you to Long Tianshu for the monthly support, and to all my readers for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 320, Harry Falls Behind. Harry didn't know what was happening outside the maze. Under the midday sun, he relaxed his grip and held his wand flat in his palm. "Show me the way," he whispered. Almost at once, the wand spun and its tip settled, pointing toward the dense hedges on his right, north. In his mind, Harry ran through the layout of the maze's 12 depressions and overlaid it with the routes Fleur and Elvis had already explored. 4 of the hollows had matched his mental map, and Fleur and Elvis had ruled out 3 more, leaving 9 possibilities. Of those 9, only 5 were wrong, and by heading northwest he would bypass all 3 discarded pits. He strode forward about 50 meters, came to a fork, paused, and whispered, "Left." Outside the maze walls, Mr. Weasley leaned against the barrier, astonished. "Harry's gone left, just like Elvis did. Incredible. It's only been 13 minutes, and Fleur's already found the correct tunnel." Inside the twisting corridors, Fleur pressed on. She held an orchid-tinted flame aloft in her left hand, its soft violet glow casting dancing shadows on the damp stone walls. The humid air clung to her skin, and a triumphant smile curved her lips. She knew she was on the right path. All the viewers glued to the screen fell silent, holding their breath. Mr. Crumb leaned forward and blurted out, "Pardon me, your daughter, is she?" At that moment, Ryan and Gabriel stepped into view. Ryan smiled and said casually, "Actually, I'm her boyfriend." Mr. Crumb's eyes went wide. After a startled pause, he waved a hand in apology. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were her brother. You're just so, well, handsome." He flushed with embarrassment, and then the stadium exploded in cheers. Victor Krum had finally appeared. "My son is popular?" Mr. Krum murmured, recalling Victor's stories from Hogwarts. He leaned closer as the camera focused on Victor's face. The familiar hooked nose was gone, replaced by 2 narrow slits at his nostrils. Seeing puzzled looks all around, Victor raised a hand and grinned. "These are shark vents, my shark nose. A great white shark can detect blood at 1/500th its original strength from a kilometer away. Mine uses water from the Black Lake as a sensing medium, so I can tell which pool in the maze is connected to the lake by the strength of its scent. My memory might not be as sharp as Harry's, but this gives me an edge." The crowd roared again as Victor lowered his hand, ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. "Only by turning my head into a shark could I pick up the scent of the Black Lake, and now I've done it." No sooner had Victor Krum finished speaking than he sprinted to the first fork in the hedge maze and darted down the left passage. Outside the maze, Arthur Weasley spoke urgently into his enchanted communicator. Krum's playing to his strengths like a true Quidditch star, using that shark-like sense of smell to outpace everyone, even though he was last off the line. He's also memorized the traps inside, so although his disarming spells are a bit rough, he's racing almost as fast as our frontrunner Draco. Draco's already reached the pool's edge. It leads straight into the Black Lake. We need the war magic blessing now. Madame Maxime, do you copy? Loud and clear came the reply from the Beauxbatons camp. "Students, begin." At once, the Beauxbatons students raised their voices in a carefully layered chorus of incantations. Thread by thread, milky white strands of magic rose from each student's heart into the night sky. The individual strands wove together until, high above the lake, they formed a single, radiant orb of light, an unmistakable sign that the champions below were about to face their greatest challenge yet. The milky white orb that bolsters defense, the violet arcane radiance that amplifies strength, and the verdant breath of divine wind embodying speed coalesced into a pearly-gray vortex. As if drawn by fate itself, they streaked down like shooting stars, pierced the earth, and poured into Fleur's body. Yet this time, the infusion of battle magic did more than merely augment her already formidable charm. It bent to her will and transformed at its very core. The dark blue flame flickering in Fleur's right palm thickened and coalesced until it liquefied into crystalline water. The Vila's native mastery of fire was reversed and magnified into dominion over water. Even through the arena's loudspeakers, the crowd could swear they heard the thunder of distant ocean waves rolling in around her towering form. The pool's inky surface writhed, splitting into sinuous serpents of liquid that wound around Fleur in a silent salute. By the time the spectators had collected themselves, Fleur was already standing, regal and unruffled, in the very heart of the lake, her powers reborn and unmistakably hers. The swirl of water around her stiffened instantly, lifting her aloft and sharpening into a gleaming blade before shooting off to the right so fast the cameras couldn't keep up. For a long, stunned moment, not a soul spoke, not even Mr. Weasley, who was supposed to be narrating the action. On every other split screen, the color drained away as the audience gaped in silence. Then Mr. Weasley found his voice. "Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts. He's located the tunnel down to the Black Lake. And Victor Krum of Durmstrang. He's through too. That leaves only Harry Potter." Overhead, the maze seemed to darken by the minute. The once vibrant sky shifted to a bruised midnight blue. But the chapter isn't over. Click on the next page to continue. Harry jogged forward, his wand already in hand. Left, right, left again. He whispered the tracing charm he'd practiced so many times. Trace the source. In the empty air ahead, drifting water vapor condensed into faint silvery lines. Of the three most prominent strands, two suddenly snapped and vanished. Harry's heart lurched. Only one line remained, and it was pointing, straight ahead. Krum and Elvstria had already uncovered one of the Black Lake tunnels. Only one remained. Harry turned toward the last archway, just to his right. "Smash to pieces," he cried, thrusting his holly wand forward. The spell tore through the ancient iron gate in a single, shattering blast. Beyond it lay a narrow corridor. At its far end, a swirling veil of golden mist shimmered in the torchlight. Clearly, an enchantment. From the stands, Ron leapt to his feet, temporarily forgetting Dumbledore's presence. "You smash to pieces! Blow it up, Harry! The tunnel's right there, in that hollow ahead!" Harry clenched his jaw. He'd heard Ron, but the crushing spell was meant for solid obstacles, not arcane barriers. He had no time to debate its finer points. Magic was magic, and he needed to clear the way now. "All right," he muttered under his breath. "End it." Pointing his wand at the mist, Harry whispered the one spell in his arsenal guaranteed to terminate any other enchantment, the ending spell. A brilliant pulse of white energy shot forward and struck the golden cloud. In an instant, the mist dissolved. For a heartbeat, Harry allowed himself a relieved smile, until the world tilted. The floor beneath him rippled, the walls spun upside down. He realized with a jolt that while the mist's power was indeed neutralized, he hadn't used the specialized dispelling charm the mist's creator had woven. He'd unleashed the fabled ending spell, the most capricious, reality-twisting incantation in all of magic. Harry's grin vanished. Triumph had turned to dread. The tunnel lay open, yes, but at what cost? The mist's magic faded and dispersed. Harry found himself suspended upside down, but his hair didn't float away, and his glasses stayed firmly on his nose. The boundless sky beneath him felt as solid as the ground he once stood on. Overhead, grass formed an unlikely ceiling. Below him stretched the endless star-speckled darkness. Steadying himself, Harry lifted a foot and took a cautious step. Chapter 793, Preparation, before entering the water. Harry blinked and stopped in his tracks. The bright sun he'd been walking beneath a moment ago now lay beneath his feet, its glow filtering up through blades of grass he was treading on. As he looked around, he realized the ground had flipped upside down. He was standing on a patch of night sky, a smooth, star-speckled canvas suspended above him. Above that, where the earth should have been, he saw only dim twilight. He hadn't noticed the change until now. Inside the maze, time and light seemed irrelevant. It had always been pitch black in those hedge walls, and the enchantment sealed out every whisper of the outside world. "How long have I been down here?" Harry wondered aloud. How could it already be night? There was no answer, but the steady hum of magic around him. He squared his shoulders, preparing to move on. After all, the maze wasn't finished with him yet. Outside the maze, in the grandstands, the audience was having a very different experience. On each spectator's right armrest, a thin, transparent shield materialized to ward off stray spells. At the same moment, a gleaming gold charger the size of a basin, a silver goblet, and a crisp parchment menu appeared before them, as if summoned by invisible hands. Dumbledore's gentle voice drifted through the enchanted earpieces everyone wore. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remember to eat while you enjoy the competition. You'll find the menu before you, with instructions for any special requests. Should you desire food or drink, simply speak to the plate in front of you, and our house elves will attend to your needs." A ripple of delighted chatter spread through the crowd as plates already began to fill with steaming dishes and cups brimmed with cool, bubbling beverages. Meanwhile, beneath the inverted heavens of the maze, Harry drew a steadying breath. Darkness might have fallen early, and another trial awaited him, but he was ready. The next challenge, he knew, would be a test of both courage and wit. The long-feared water chamber lay just ahead. "Tableware, food and drinks will appear momentarily." The announcer's voice rang through the stands just as a gleaming banquet of fried chicken legs and frosty pumpkin juice materialized before Ron. "Fried chicken legs! Iced pumpkin juice!" Ron cheered, diving into the feast, while his eyes stayed glued to the screen, showing Harry dangling upside down in the maze. He muffled through a drumstick, "Come on, Harry, your tunnel's right up ahead." All 4 champions had now entered the maze. From the spectator's vantage point, every shallow dip in the floor, each hiding a tunnel to the black lake, glowed softly. That's why Ron was certain Harry's tracing charm had pinpointed the correct hollow at the end of the corridor. Fleur's monitor, by contrast, remained frustratingly blurry. She was sweeping the lake's surface at remarkable speed, and only 3 minutes ago had her screen flickered clear long enough to reveal she'd claimed a badge. There wasn't time to catch which school it belonged to, what magical creatures guarded it, or the precise conditions underwater. At that very moment, Elvis and Crumb reached the tunnel's end and discovered a dark pool shimmering before them. Harry, taking his final step, felt the ground drop away beneath his feet and was sucked up into the hollow directly above him. Harry drew a sharp breath as his surroundings snapped back into place. He found himself kneeling on soft, damp earth. Sunlight streamed in through the tunnel's mouth, driving away the shadows and revealing the path ahead in perfect clarity. "Fantastic!" Mr. Weasley cried, leaping to his feet. "Harry's definitely picked the right tunnel. Now he's on equal footing with the other 2 champions." Victor Crumb paused at the water's edge, hesitating as if to invoke the same war magic charm Dracula had just used. Professor Karkaroff remained motionless behind him, his students at Durmstrang already chanting the incantation themselves. Across the starting line, Elvas made no such preparations. He hadn't purchased any protective enchantments. With a graceful dive, he slipped beneath the surface of the black lake. Within moments, the bubblehead charm bloomed around him, enclosing his head in a perfect air pocket. How would he locate the hidden badge? And what fearsome creature guarded it? He would need complete stillness to get his bearings. Sure enough, Elvis surfaced just long enough, 3 precise seconds, to survey his surroundings, then sank into the current, disappearing beneath a cascade of bubbles. The onlookers watched breathlessly, unable to read his expression behind that shimmering bubble helmet. And then, something unexpected rose from the depths. Dracula emerged, dripping wet, clutching not 1 but 2 gleaming badges in her hands. The crowd gasped. How had she reached the badge so quickly? And why did she hold 2? A stunned silence fell over the gathering as everyone struggled to comprehend the astonishing sight. "Where did he find it?" one commentator blurted. "And what magical creature is guarding that badge?" "We haven't the faintest idea," another replied. "It looks like we'll have to wait for the remaining champions to reveal themselves." At that moment, a swirling gray vortex, formed by the convergence of the 3 war magic enchantments, shattered the stone wall above Victor Krum and surged into his body. He lurched forward, staggered, then sank to 1 knee in the water. His right arm broke the surface, clutching his wand as it began to trace intricate arcs through the air. "Professor Weasley to Professor Dumbledore," crackled the announcer's voice over the loudspeakers. "Can you tell us what the Durmstrang champion is attempting? What spell is he casting?" The giant screens flickered, and Albus Dumbledore's calm visage filled the courtyard. He adjusted his half-moon spectacles and began. What you're witnessing is an extremely rare Bulgarian human transfiguration technique, passed down only through certain bloodlines. It resembles an animagus transformation and is widely believed to have evolved from the ancient Vagadu self-transfiguration charm. As you can now see, Crumb has transformed into a shark. Under normal circumstances, such a complete metamorphosis would be nearly impossible, but bolstered by the power of war magic, he has achieved it. No sooner had Dumbledore finished speaking than a colossal great white shark broke through the water's surface with a thunderous crash. For a heartbeat, it hovered in midair, majestic and terrifying, before plunging back into the pool, sending curtains of spray cascading over the crowd. Silence fell for a moment as spectators processed the extraordinary sight. Then the roar of the crowd swelled once more, filling the arena with stunned, exhilarated cheers. From the surface, all anyone could see of Crumb was a pair of thick, muscular arms emerging from the shark-like, sickle-shaped pectoral fins that rippled through the water. "It was a stroke of genius for Crumb to keep his arms," Mr. Weasley exclaimed, leaning forward. "He'll still be able to cast spells in his animal form, and those hands will come in handy when he's grabbing trophies later." With that, all three champions dove beneath the inky surface of the Black Lake in their own distinctive styles. Harry Potter, meanwhile, paused at the water's edge. He closed his eyes, muttered the words of the war magic blessing, and felt its power hum through his veins. Reaching into his robe, he produced a small, damp bundle, countless slippery gray-green strands that looked like oversized mouse tails. Gillyweed, delivered by Owl 4 days earlier, tested and stored carefully in a sealed pouch ever since. Harry unwrapped it and took a tentative bite. The flavor was strange, smooth and slightly briny, almost like sucking on an octopus tentacle, but its magic began to work immediately. First, his lungs felt constricted, as if pressed by an invisible pillow. He gasped, then fell silent as the pressure shifted. A sharp, stinging sensation flared beneath his ears, and Rory realized with a startled thrill that gills were forming there. Pain flashed, but it receded almost as quickly as it came, leaving his body humming with new, extraordinary strength. He knelt at the edge, exhaled calmly, and, without another thought, slipped beneath the waves to join the others in the underwater challenge. After only a few moments in the water, Harry felt his body begin to change. At first, he could literally pull oxygen from the liquid, his lungs drawing in life-sustaining air as easily as if he were breathing at the surface. Then, unnerving tendrils of webbing sprouted between his fingers and toes. His skin took on a faintly fish-scaled sheen, and a second, transparent eyelid slid down over each eye, just like a crocodile's nictitating membrane, granting him perfect vision beneath the waves. He had to admit, the gillyweed was astonishingly effective. But when he glanced at his reflection in the murky water, he was mortified. If the entire audience at the Triwizard Tournament saw him like this, he'd never live it down. He needed to reverse the transformation, and fast, and only raw, unbridled magical power could do it. War magic would be the source. Rising to his feet on the sloping bed of the Black Lake, Harry crushed the slimy seaweed in his hand. Then, heart-pounding, he drew on every ounce of magic he could muster, and borrowed more still from the Hogwarts students watching above. They were all ready to pour their energy into him. He merely had to direct it. As he focused, the gray-green sludge oozing from the rocky walls of the lake bank began to swirl, infused by the tumultuous power of the war magic he wielded. Behind him, the other competitors paused in amazement. Above, the stands erupted into a stunned silence. Albus Dumbledore, Lily Evans, and Severus Snape all rose as one, their eyes fixed on Harry's figure. And on the commentary platform, Mr. Roberts' voice trailed off into breathless astonishment, unable to find words for the extraordinary sight unfolding below. Within seconds, the unwanted fish-like traits peeled away, leaving Harry looking every bit the human champion he had been at the start of the task, albeit with a very memorable story to tell. "Professor, what on earth is Harry doing?" Weasley blurted out at just the right moment. Dumbledore's eyes widened. "He's channeling pure magical energy, no crucible, no water, no oils or typical potion reagents, and concocting an entirely new, unknown brew from thin air." A ripple of astonishment spread through the classroom. Harry's feat had captured everyone's attention, bolstered, of course, by the steady support, the Stranger Traveler's monthly pass, Taishi Cornsilk's classmate endorsement, and a host of recommendations and subscriptions from fellow students. Chapter 794, Competition Under Ryan's Influence. A revolution is underway in the art of potioncraft. At its heart lies the crucible, a vessel of fire and water that bears the fierce chemical reactions within. Equally vital are the liquid bases, water and oil. They are the carriers of herbal properties, indispensable for any true potion. No matter how potent a single herb may be, it cannot become a full-fledged magic elixir, let alone restore the dead, without the delicate blending of other botanicals, elemental essences, mineral powders, soils, animal derivatives, acids, and salts. Today, Harry has pushed this centuries-old craft into uncharted territory. He funneled a colossal surge of energy into sackgrass, transmuting it so that it alone possessed every condition required for a complete potion's creation. Astonishingly, even Harry isn't entirely sure why he went this far. His original goal had been modest: alter the sackgrass's properties just enough to grant him the ability to breathe underwater, without changing his own body. But Harry overlooked one critical factor. He has already ingested a powerful potion, one known only as the Dark Wizard. Forged from the residual magic of Voldemort himself, infused with raw emotional currents and fragmented memories, this elixir ranks at the highest level of the alchemical sequence. Its potency still courses through Harry's veins, subtly warping every magical experiment he undertakes, including this unprecedented transformation of sackgrass into a living, self-sustaining potion. Now, as the competition under Ryan's influence begins, no one can predict what extraordinary effects this hybrid concoction will unleash on the audience, on the contestants, or on Harry himself. In the Mirror World's old black family mansion, deep in the boiler room, Harry's body lay submerged in the churning red magma born from the ocean of magic. His flesh had instinctively absorbed its properties, an instinct that, under normal circumstances, should have faded with time. Yet, having briefly ascended to godhood not long ago, Harry found that this reflex had crystallized into an innate talent he barely noticed: void alchemy. He wasn't the only one touched by Ryan's gift. Fleur, whose bond with Ryan was stronger, had undergone even more intensive training. In her hands, the soft-legged Jinx took on a sophisticated new form, an advanced delayed casting technique known as a group cast. Like all delayed spells, it relies on repeatedly summoning the memory of the original magical impulse. But whereas standard delayed casting fires once and then regenerates, Fleur's group cast conceals that first release entirely. Instead, she quietly builds layer upon layer of magical energy, tiny spheres coalescing at her wand's tip, until, in an explosive crescendo, they all detonate at once, ensnaring every enemy in their radius. When Fleur finally unleashed her perfected group-cast softleg against the red-capped intruders, the air crackled with raw power. For a moment, time seemed to slow as those glowing motes of magic swirled and multiplied in midair. Then, as one, they burst outward, locking each adversary in place and turning an already desperate struggle decisively in the defender's favor. Chapter 8. Sovereign of the Black Lake. At last, Furong had mastered a breakthrough. She could channel her war magic into the art of transmutation. This astonishing shift was made possible by Ryan's mysterious potion, an elixir that had suppressed her Vila fertility. Yet, as much as the brew expanded her abilities, its lingering influence had kept her from earning all her merit badges. Given her newfound agility and absolute command of water, she ought to have claimed every badge the moment she arrived at the Black Lake. The truth, however, was that Ryan's potent concoctions still pulsed through her veins, interfering with the lake's ancient tests. By nature, Vila combined pyrokinesis with irresistible charm. Their fire manifests as intricate spells and dancing embers, but it is their beguiling presence that exerts the strongest magic over living beings. Furong, in contrast, had become a convergence of water and enchantment. Through the fusion of war magic and Ryan's elixir, she didn't just summon water, she transmuted flame into stream and torrent. That unparalleled skill elevated her, in the elemental hierarchy, to the position of water's true monarch. The Black Lake itself seemed to recognize her claim. Waves rose in greeting, cascading around her like devoted subjects, urging their sovereign to take her throne beneath the moonlit surface. Yet with this triumph came an unexpected consequence, one that would send ripples through both Farong's destiny and the wider world of magic. Fleur scarcely noticed when the centuries of magic flowing through the Black Lake began to feed themselves directly into her mind. Lost mermaid enchantments, the guarded secrets of generations of Slytherin families, an endless torrent of hidden knowledge poured in all at once. She felt it pressing on her consciousness, fragmenting her thoughts, even as she hunted for the missing badge. There was no time, or mental clarity, to flaunt her talents before the onlookers. With a flick of her will over the water, she seized the badge and vanished in a blur of rippling currents, slipping back to the arena just in time for the next challenge. In the grandstands, excitement crackled in the air. Audiences were still buzzing over Dumbledore's subtle mastery, and the dazzling duets of Professors Snape and Evans had only raised the bar. Then came Mrs. Volcanova of Castrupsh, headmistress of the school renowned for its unrivaled potion craft, and Castor Pollock, patriarch of the illustrious Pollock brewing dynasty. Both performances left even the most experienced judges shaken. After all, Castrupsh's vaults were said to hold recipes lost to time, and Pollock himself was the grandfather of Labashu Pollock, whose name alone commanded respect in every alchemy circle. On the giant screen above the arena, Harry stepped into view. Under a hush of anticipation, he lifted a small vial, a gray, crystal-clear potion that shimmered with promise. With a steadying breath, he uncapped it, and, to the crowd's collective gasp, tipped it back and swallowed in one swift motion. Harry blinked, astonished by how vividly his senses had come alive. He could almost taste the damp, earthy scent of the lake. He could smell it resonating in his eardrums. Shaking his head to clear the odd impression, he realized with a jolt, his ears could actually smell. And it wasn't only his ears. Sight, touch, taste, even his skin felt intertwined, each sense amplified by the others. A wave of relief swept through him, dissolving every trace of fear. As he stepped into the pool, the frigid water should have stung, but instead it felt like warm, invisible hands kneading his muscles from within. Encouraged, Harry leaned forward and submerged his head completely. The water flooded his eyes, ears, mouth, and nostrils, yet brought no discomfort, only a serene completeness, as if he'd discovered a missing piece of himself. At the faintest thought, the water around him rippled and surged, gently propelling him onward. Before long, the tunnel's mouth shrank to a narrow slit behind him. He had no idea how the other competitors had located these magical aquatic guardians of the badge, but he sensed their goodwill. Whether by instinct or enchantment, they seemed to recognize the badge and the contest itself. With their currents guiding him, Harry surrendered to the water's flow and pressed on toward whatever lay ahead. After he voiced his intent, his water companion enveloped him in a swirling embrace, and they plunged into the lake's depths. Instantly, the world went silent, and the murky water closed in around him. Despite the darkness, he felt no fear. His senses reached out about 20 feet in every direction, enough to guide him. He didn't need to kick a stroke himself. Instead, the current of living water carried him onward. Every few moments, the dim expanse ahead shifted, revealing a new mysterious tableau. First came a forest of waving, ebony-hued water plants whose tangled fronds drifted like ribbons in a breeze. Then a wide sweep of muddy sand carpeted with glittering pebbles, each one catching the faint, ambient light and gleaming like stars on a midnight shore. There was a strange, haunting beauty to it all. They pressed deeper toward the lake's heart. His eyes, adjusted to the gloom, swept across distant shadows where the water grew darker still. Tiny fish, silver darts, zipped past him, their scales flashing before they vanished into the haze. Twice he thought he glimpsed something far larger, a hulking silhouette that rippled through the gloom. Twice he kicked in excitement before remembering his companion's gentle warning, "Not our quarry." And both times he was disappointed. Those shapes were merely strangers of the deep, not the true prize they sought. Undeterred, he let the current guide him further into the unknown, eager to discover what lay at the very center of this hidden realm. He swam closer, only to discover that the dark shape was nothing more than a long, black log, or perhaps a dense, tangled clump of water grass. It wasn't the flowing mane of a pony-shaped water monster, nor the writhing tentacles of a giant octopus, as he'd feared. Sensing his anxiety, his aquatic companion stirred the current, sending a rush of fish-scented bubbles swirling around him. Harry squinted through the haze, searching for a landmark. Before him lay a 2-foot-thick carpet of green water grass, so lush it resembled an underwater lawn. He stared unblinkingly into the shadowed expanse, determined to make out the strange shape hidden within. And then it appeared again, the unmistakable silhouette of the pony-shaped water monster. Chapter 323, Ron's Breakup. On paper, Harry should have been the one everyone cheered for, as he discovered the aquatic guardian protecting the badge, a moment of pure triumph. Even Arthur Weasley, Harry's father-in-law and today's official commentator, ought to have been beside himself with excitement. Yet Arthur called it with the same polite detachment as the rest of the crowd. "Brilliant work, Harry. At last we know the first creature is a Kelpie," he announced, his tone almost casual. The half-hearted reaction made sense once you'd seen Harry in the water. From the moment he swallowed the potion and slipped beneath the surface, there was almost no movement. His eyes and skin were ashen, his dark hair drifting like wet reeds. He hung in the current with the rigid stillness of a body swept along by the river. Had he not flexed his fingers and kicked now and then, the scene would have been positively chilling. Still, cheers erupted. Ginny clapped and shouted his name. Neville, Draco, Anthony, all of them joined in. All except Ron, the one person who should have been first on his feet. Instead, Ron stood frozen at the edge of the arena, his attention fixed on a single, crumpled piece of parchment clutched tightly in his hand. Dumbledore's face was even paler than Harry's when he'd climbed from the water. Sensing something was wrong, he tapped the small hearing device at his ear to mute it and lowered his gaze. "What is it, lad?" Ron blinked once, twice, then shook his head. "Nothing." But his mind drifted back 10 minutes, to when Dumbledore had been fully absorbed in Harry's condition. At that point, Ron had been sitting beside Terry, who had leaned over and quietly slipped him a folded parchment. "Here, this just arrived from Lavender," Terry had whispered. Ron had put down his half-eaten chicken leg, wiped the grease off his robes, and unfolded the note with a rising sense of dread. Lavender's cramped handwriting filled the page. "Hey, Ron, just thought I'd tell you what a childish, lazy, perverted jerk you are. Honestly, I don't know why you think you're so great. Haven't you heard what Parvati and Professor Trelawney say about you? And if you haven't, or if you simply don't care, I'm not surprised. You're arrogant, conceited, ignorant, a total loser who leeches off your friends' success, Harry's in particular, and then tries to claim their glory as your own. Poor Mum. She's the only one who'll stand by you no matter what. And don't even get me started on Ginny. She's with Harry now, not you." Ron's fingers cramped around the parchment, his stomach twisting. He forced himself back to the present. Dumbledore's pale face hovered above him. "Ron? Nothing," he said again, aiming for casual. But his voice cracked just slightly. Dumbledore gave him a knowing look, as though he understood far more than he let on. "Very well. Let us attend to Mr. Potter." Ron tucked the crumpled letter into his robes, determined to focus on Harry. But Lavender's words burned at the back of his mind, reminding him of just how alone he'd been made to feel. Ron stared at the letter in his hands, his heart hammering as he reread the final line. "The best thing that's happened to me this year is that I finally see you clearly. Your ex-girlfriend, Lavender Brown." No matter how many times he scanned the page, he couldn't find a single outright breakup line, yet every sentence dripped with it. Ron felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Beside him, Harry stepped up to the edge of the Black Lake. With a swift swish of his wand, he transfigured a curl of water into a school of tiny fish. The fish darted off into the murky depths, luring a sleek, horse-headed hippocampus toward the surface. In one smooth motion, Harry plunged in, wrestling free the first of the 4 badges. Ron barely noticed the cheers. It wasn't that he didn't recognize how brilliant Harry's trick was, turning water itself into bait, then outswimming a water creature to claim the Hogwarts emblem, but his mind was elsewhere. "Fantastic," he managed to call Harry's got the Hogwarts badge. First of the lot. He's beaten the other 2 champions who dove in before him. And see that swirl of eelgrass? 2 badges still lie down there, which means one of Crumb's trophies has to be from our school. Incredible. He shook his head, trying to focus. Across the lake, Victor Krum emerged from a tangle of writhing grindylows. In what looked like mere seconds, Krum unleashed a flurry of extraction charms, forcing the pinching water demons to release their grip. He brushed himself off and headed deeper into the weed bed in pursuit of his second badge. Ron squinted at the water's surface, where shadows shifted. Hold on, what's that up ahead? Mermen? Are they counted among the magical creatures for this task? He stumbled over the word mermaids before catching himself, cheeks burning as muddlers around him snickered. He cleared his throat, determined to see the task through. After all, Harry's victory should have felt exhilarating. If Ron could just push Lavender's letter to the back of his mind, perhaps he could cheer with genuine pride. Instead, he found himself wondering what it truly meant when someone you cared about finally sees you clearly. Mermaids, like centaurs, had formally rejected the label human, choosing instead to call themselves beasts so as not to share a category with hags and vampires. Yet, by an unspoken convention of the magical world, they still counted among humankind. Ahead of Victor Krum loomed a massive boulder, its weathered surface inlaid with 3 Castrobsha crests. Surrounding it was a phalanx of mermaids, each gripping a spear. Their skin was iron gray, their hair a dark green that rippled like algae, and their eyes, and even their teeth, gleamed a predatory yellow. Thick silver fins curled beneath them, anchoring them in shallow water. If these were indeed the aquatic guardians assigned to protect the badges in this task, then the Ministry's decision reeked of naked prejudice. Far worse than the insult, mudblood. Mermaids were not a blood status issue like Muggle-borns or half-blood wizards competing for the same jobs. They were a full-fledged magical race. The few who whispered that mermaids had once been human were dismissed as fanciful. In theory, they shared the same origins as all magical folk, hardly a justification for turning them into living obstacles. And this wasn't a private affair. The entire spectacle was being broadcast live, coast to coast, across Europe. Had it been confined to Britain, conservative critics might have grumbled. But now the world was watching and judging. Victor Krum didn't know what to expect. At worst, he'd face nothing more serious than criticism, but somewhere in Europe, the International Confederation of Wizards might protest. As he and the others drew nearer to the rocky shore, scores of rough stone dwellings came into view. Covered in algae and hidden among waterweed, these hovels often boasted small gardens or clusters of kelp swaying at the doorways. From every direction, curious mermen and mermaids circled, eyeing Krum as if he were some exotic beast, a great white shark miraculously swimming in fresh water. Krum's right hand tightened around his wand. He hesitated, unsure of how to proceed in this strange undersea village, until a towering figure glided forward. A merperson more than 7 feet tall, distinguished by a long green beard and a necklace of shark teeth, commanded everyone's attention. The onlookers scattered respectfully. In a hoarse, resonant voice, the bearded mermaid addressed Krum. "Greetings, champion. You have conquered the level guarded by the Grindylows. Now all that remains is to claim your badge." Krum raised his wand as though to cast a spell on himself, but the gesture seemed to amuse him more than frighten. He cleared his throat. "If I've passed the trial, then why are you here?" The mermaid's aquamarine eyes twinkled. "I have other duties, champion," he replied dryly. "The magical media has insisted on recording every moment of the tournament. I'm here to make sure they get top Heir footage." Krum allowed himself a rueful smile. So even down here, the Tri-Wizard tournament couldn't escape the press. With that unexpected answer, he steeled himself for one final step, and the promise of his hard-earned badge gleaming somewhere beyond the next kelp forest. Chapter: The Mermaid's Stone. According to Professor Dumbledore, Mr. Weasley had said earlier, this competition is being watched by wizards all over Europe, and quite possibly the entire wizarding world. It's a splendid chance for the other champions to experience our customs firsthand. Underwater, Victor Krum followed his mermaid guide through the dimly lit currents of the Black Lake. At her silent signal, he paused before a massive boulder. Almost instantly, a circle of merpeople gathered, bowed stiffly, then slipped away as one when the mermaid approached. Their departure revealed the face of the rock itself, smooth flanks and, toward the bottom, the gracefully carved fin of a colossal mermaid statue. Krum's curiosity overwhelmed him. He reached out and traced the elegant curve of the stone tail. It was then he spotted the faint glow of a rune at its base. With a firm press, the tail clicked, then creaked aside to unveil a narrow tunnel spiraling into shadow. A triumphant smile flickered across Crumb's face as he inclined his head to the mermaid. Together, they slipped into the hidden passage, leaving the statue's silent gaze behind. Above the water, on the shore outside the maze, Mr. Weasley stood among the assembled judges. He glanced nervously at the rippling surface overhead, waiting for any sign from the champions. Pious Thickness, head of the Wizengamot, exhaled and lowered his notes. That last flurry of disturbance was nothing more than native merpeople reacting to a foreign presence, Thickness reported. They aren't guarding a second badge, just curious creatures of the lake. Thank goodness, Mr. Weasley replied, wiping his brow. My heart skipped a beat, but we still haven't determined where the second badge found on one of the champions came from. Which school did it belong to? Thickness tapped his list. So far, Beauxbatons and Hogwarts have presented theirs. Durmstrang's badge has yet to surface. Only Elvina's of the Castrop School remains unaccounted for. Mr. Weasley nodded, scanning the lake's surface. Then all we can do is wait and hope he emerges soon. Chapter 324, Ryan's End, also catalogued as Chapter 796, The End of Ryan. Mr. Weasley didn't glance at Irvis's monitor. Instead, his eyes drifted to the upper right corner, Fleur's broadcast window. Fleur materialized on screen and held her pose for nearly 3 seconds, giving everyone a clear, uninterrupted look. Her once golden, silver-streaked hair had shifted to a deep sea blue, flecked with tiny motes of light that danced with every subtle movement. Her radiant alabaster skin seemed almost translucent, as if even the air around her carried the promise of tears. The fiery, overt allure she once radiated was gone. In its place was a poised, restrained elegance that proved even more magnetic. The entire stadium felt hushed by her presence. Ron, still reeling from recent grief, loosened his grip on the parchment he'd been clutching. Moments later, Fleur's image flickered and the window went hazy once again. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Had Fleur managed to claim any badges during that brief appearance? 3? 4? All eyes returned to the scoreboard, eager for the confirmation they'd almost missed. Mr. Weasley cleared his throat into the microphone and leaned forward. Sound, please. Roll back a few seconds to when Dracula first appeared. Not the full frame, just her hand and the badge it's holding. The large screen above them flickered, then sharpened into focus. A flawless hand, smooth and pale as porcelain, hovered into view. Resting delicately in its grasp were 3 emblems, the crests of Hogwarts, Casterbush, and Durmstrang. There! Mr. Weasley exclaimed. Notice anything? The Beauxbatons badge is missing. She's only 1 token short of completing the set, and she's already come back from the heart of that deadly maze. In the audience, Pansy Parkinson's eyes snapped from the screen to the stage, where Draco Malfoy stood beside her. His pale face went nearly translucent under her stare. Trying to steer the conversation away from Pansy's glare, Draco cleared his throat. Pansy, he said, forcing nonchalance into his voice. Did you catch what Mr. Weasley said about the maze being dangerous? Truth is, competitors walked through it weeks ago. The real challenge isn't the creatures or the traps, it's finding your way back after you've collected the badges. He held out his hands, as if to illustrate his point. It's a test of memory and spatial awareness. You have to remember every twist and turn, but that's exactly what the Triwizard Maze is designed to evaluate. Pansy, still glaring, said nothing. Draco's explanation hung in the air, an attempt to rationalize the perilous trial they all faced should they ever step inside those winding hedges. Yet for the moment, the spectators' attention was riveted back on the screen, where Dracula's single missing badge had just become the focus of every hopeful school spirit in the stands. In the crowded stands, 2 witches leaned in over steaming butterbeers, watching the big screens intently. I don't see why retracing their steps should be a problem, the first murmured. Clum's memory might be abysmal, but his nose, like a great white shark's, will scent that tunnel on the far side in no time, which can only mean the maze they emerge into isn't the one they left. I'm willing to bet they've unleashed those shadowy beasts, or something even more vicious. Her companion raised an eyebrow. Why do you think that? Did you catch the camera on Mr. Weasley? the first witch said, voice low. The moment it cut back to him, Hagrid was gone from the canteen. You know how much he loves his monsters. I'd put money on the fact that he stocked the maze with them. I don't follow, her friend said. That's exactly why Professor McGonagall and the others are patrolling the perimeter, to keep those creatures from getting out. Do Harry and the other champions know about this? The second witch asked. Absolutely. They never even used the light potions they were handed. Her friend shook her head in resignation. Then it's a done deal. Fleur's going to win. The first witch smiled. Not so fast. If anyone else can collect all the badges before Fleur grabs that last one and dashes back through the tunnel, there's still a chance. Provided, of course, someone's figured out that loophole. What tactic are you talking about? Harry asked. Think about this, Hermione said. Suppose one champion, after collecting his badge, decides to stay in another's tunnel instead of heading for the exit. Remember what Dumbledore said in the Great Hall, once a champion enters a tunnel, the entrance seals behind them. So, that means any champion who tries to backtrack by memory or sense of direction will find the tunnel blocked. They'll be stuck. I see, Harry nodded. So the champion occupying the tunnel can ambush others. Exactly. But how would they know where another champion's tunnel is? They're all different. Hermione smiled. You don't need to memorize it. Some beings can locate tunnels by other means. Krum. They turned to see Victor Krum emerging from the darkness of the Black Lake, water dripping from his cloak. He looked surprised by their intense stares. Krum wasn't overly confident about winning. Sharks, his favored marine creatures, use smell, not sight, to hunt. Yet every stretch of the lake's shore was rimmed with blooming hibiscus, and his keen nose caught that same floral scent drifting through the water. On top of that, he'd noticed that one of the merpeople's gold badges had vanished before he surfaced. It all added up. Fleur Delacour had already secured at least one badge. Fleur had already surfaced with 4 badges in hand, which more or less confirmed she'd claimed first place. That left Krum in hot pursuit of second, darting through the murky water with calculated precision, and, as it turned out, a highly developed sense of smell. He paused only briefly when a faint trace of Harry and Irvis drifted his way, then angled himself toward Harry's last known position. It made perfect sense. Any underwater cranny Harry might investigate was now the likeliest spot to hide another badge. It's curious, Krum murmured to himself. Every other champion except Irvis seems to stumble upon their badge even using the most erratic search paths. They surface as soon as they find it. But Irvis, she's been sweeping the lake in a perfect S pattern since she left the tunnel, and she still hasn't turned up hers. On the shore, Mr. Weasley's excited commentary echoed across the water. From where he watched, Ryan could scarcely keep a straight face. This Black Lake task felt orchestrated by gods. Harry let the current guide him almost as if it were an old friend, and with the exception of Fleur, no one matched his speed in locating badges. Krum, for his part, was barely 6th, simply following Harry's trail by scent. As Harry moved on to his final objective, every eye turned to the mermaid's cavern, where the last badge awaited. Victor Krum was the second competitor to collect all the badges. Had he followed Draco's plan and blocked Harry's shortcut, he might truly have secured that spot. Fleur, on the other hand, was even more stubborn. If she'd been willing to abandon the hidden trove of knowledge in the Black Lake, she'd already have escaped the maze and claimed the Triwizard Cup. And then there was Elva's. His sole gift was seeing 7 seconds into the future. That kind of precognition can save you in a maze filled with splitting corridors and hidden pits, but in the open expanse of the Black Lake, it proved all but useless. Even taking what he believed to be the safest, most logical route to the goal, he still finished dead last. But this wasn't the time to stand on the sidelines. A flicker of golden light danced across Ryan's vision, and in the next heartbeat, everything froze. Beneath the roiling currents of the Black Lake, Ryan's figure solidified in mid-water. Before him drifted Fleur, her eyes vacant, her blue hair shimmering like starlight. Ryan snapped his fingers. A single golden galleon leapt from Fleur's robe, whirling between them and drawing them both into its rank orbit. Crimson waves crashed overhead, overturning the spell's delicate balance. In an instant, time snapped back to normal. Kate furrowed her brow. What was that all about? A heartbeat later, her eyes flicked back to Farong's display, and it was perfectly normal again. On screen, Farong glided through the water toward a pitch-black cave, its entrance ringed by dark, swirling currents. Clearing her throat, she announced, "Obviously, I went to help Farong."